Welcome to episode 44 of the Chris AFL podcast with Nick and Blaze. This week, we are continuing on with our preseason analysis of all 18 teams. We will be covering GWS, Hawthorn, Melbourne and North Melbourne this week. So let's jump straight into it. How are you doing, Mr. Psyrick?
Not too bad, not too bad. I am doing all right. I just had a nice little... I will say nice. It was peachy weather last week. But I was house sitting for my auntie in Rockingham Coast in WA, right next to the beach. So even though it was a bit of a... Well, it wasn't like the heat itself. It was the humidity. Had a few days over 50%. And for Perth, that's just not that usual. We're used to like Brisbane getting that sort of weather. So, you know. So apart from that, you know, as I said, did a bit of reading, finished up these analyses. Yeah, something like that. And yeah, as I said, so it was nice and relaxing. I got a few things on this week. Again, going to a few shows, going to a few concerts.
Very nice, very nice.
But yeah, and yeah, as I said, a few other things like few birthdays. Tends to be a lot of birthdays around this period for my side of the family. So should be a good week of relaxing with friends and family.
Excellent.
And doing these.
Yeah, I mean, we're enjoying doing these, that's for sure. Yeah, they may go on a little bit long, but, you know, we go pretty in-depth, I think.
We try to.
For me, this past week has been pretty busy, actually. I helped with a Marvel Rivals tournament on Saturday. I helped with I briefly played in an Overwatch tournament on Wednesday. I did my usual sort of stuff Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And overall, it's been a pretty good week. The weather itself has been quite warm, so that hasn't been fun. And then there was a storm that rolled in yesterday as we're recording this, which ruined my plans to do my usual 5K run that I do every Sunday. So yeah, I didn't get to do that.
He's been posting on his own socials, and he's been getting pretty good time for
I have
pretty freshy. You didn't have any running in your history, have you?
I mean, I did. I was fairly good at cross country back in high school, but obviously, you know, that's been like 7-8 years now since I last did that. So actually, it's been longer than 8 years. Probably closer to 9-10 years, in fact, for me personally.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, but like because I've been like doing a lot of workouts and stuff and keeping to my fitness regimen that I've been kind of like coached to do. My legs are feeling pretty good. My body's feeling pretty good. So I figured I'd test myself by doing 5Ks this year. And so far it's been I've done 3 out of the 5 weeks so far. Because I skipped one originally because I got the tattoo and we're not meant to like sweat a ton when you get a tattoo. And then obviously I missed
that, yeah.
And obviously I missed yesterday because of the storm because I don't really want to go out in the rain. So besides that, it's been pretty good. I think I think I'm at like 33 minutes. After like a little over 5K, so it's been pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, I have been roped into park runs before, and I can get near 30 minutes. I think like I'm normally like a 34 sort of person, but I lose my leg function the next couple of days afterwards.
Yeah, I'm expecting the next time we go see our friends in Adelaide, we might get roped into another one.
Maybe.
All right,
we'll see.
Shall we crack on with our first team?
Yes. We have split the duties for the team previews, but I am up first with a preview of the GWS Giants. That's why if you check the thumbnail, we did big poses for the big team.
Indeed, we did.
And yeah, as I said, it's a pretty interesting one in my opinion. I'm still a bit mixed on GWS. But looking through them, there's a fair bit to be positive about. The excitement, obviously, as you can see there, got a little stringer in the corner. Good addition to that very potent forward line, and it will be exciting to see what they do in 2025.
Absolutely.
But first of all, we'll have a look at 2024, and you know, they were pretty keen to match the results of 2023, where they got to the prelim finals, and they sort of got out to a pretty solid fire. They won 6 of the first 7 matches. They did have a pretty soft schedule, but they did get wins against the Pies and the Lions, which was very good. Obviously, a part of that was due, as you can see, up in the north, up in the top bits, there's a lot of scores over 100. And part of this was to do with the blistering form of Jesse Hogan and the distribution of the breakout year of Brent Daniels. So that's sort of where they were. And then sort of had a bit of a falter mid-season, lost 3 on the trot, partially due to the hole left by young gun Sam Taylor. He missed a couple of games and sort of, I'll say he was fighting through injury most of the back half of the year. He sort of got back into a bit of form late, but his efforts had to be patched up by a few other players, which they did. We'll talk about that a bit later. And then the middle of the team, they had a big win against the Cats at GMBA, had a 7-4 record mid-year, and then just sort of had a mixed bag at the end of the season. They lost against the Adelaide team. Sorry, wait a minute. That should just be Adelaide team. They won against Port Adelaide. They got spanked by Sydney, and then, they would go on perfectly until the final round, which was the wind bowl against the Doggies, a very weird game in Tasmania.
It was.
And they finished, as I said, it was so blistery, but they were very surprisingly accurate, especially for 2 teams not known for their accuracy. So anyway, they finished 15 and 8, fourth on the ladder with a win percentage of 109.2. I would say they never really put any teams away, but really most of their matches, they were pretty much in it. They probably had one of the tighter, range of scores and margins of all the teams in the league.
Yeah, I'd say if you were to put their numbers into a graph, it'd be pretty much dead on in the middle for the most part.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, you can look there, the biggest ones were, against what you would expect with the Eagles, one big win against the Lions, and, a lot of 20 and, sometimes 30-point wins, but, not many blowouts, a couple of really close wins, a couple of really close losses. But yeah, overall pretty good. Heading into the finals with a lot of form. And on the next slide, I just highlighted the 2 finals performances, which were pretty disappointing. Gonna be honest. They had the Swans on the rope halfway through the match. We talked about it at 4, in both the recap and sort of the finals. What do you call it? Season's overview.
Yes, we did.
But yeah, 2 games had the victory in their grasp and just 2 fade outs late. It was very disappointing to see, but as we'll go through the stats, but I think there's sort of a reason why this happens, but why GWS just tend to keep teams around them, which we'll go through in a bit. But overall, it just sort of hurt that, they seem to have done a bit better than last year. I know they made top 4 both years, but they just seemed a bit more consistent this year. They saw some growth of a few players, and especially, obviously, with that forward line. And to have it finished progressing less further than they did.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm pretty sure they didn't finish top 4 in 2023. I'm pretty sure they finished 5th or 6th.
Oh, they finished 5th and made the prelims.
Yeah, because they played St Kilda and knocked St Kilda out straight away.
Yeah, okay.
But okay, yeah, they did make the prelim, so it's
that's what I was sort of saying anyway. They reached a higher position on the ladder and then just went out in straight sets, which will be pretty disappointing. Obviously, against the Swans and the Lions, it's 2 pretty hard teams to come up against. But
yeah, the teams that happen to go on into the grand final, might you add?
Yeah, so it's a pinch of salt whether you want to say it's better or for worse. But we'll look at the stats, and I think pretty much overall, you can sort of see that the Giants' offense, although only 6 in terms of goals scored in the league, when you look at some of their efficiency, you can see a lot of really good things. Goals per inside 50 was 26.1, which was 3rd. Their goal assists were 3rd, 9.5 per game. The accuracy, 2nd in the league, 54.3, which sort of was because they took fairly easy shots, probably due to their marking prowess. A lot of shots close to goal. So their marks inside 50 was a total of third in the competition. And not surprisingly, the inside 50 rate was 25.9. Sorry, the marks inside 50 rate, which was first in the league. Obviously, when you have the likes of Cadman, Hogan, even Riccardi, I think took above average marks inside 50 this year.
I don't know. You know I don't like him.
Yeah, well, as I said, stats are stats. And as I said, I'm pretty sure most of the key forwards were above average in that. And even when the ball get to ground, you can see that tackle inside 50 pressure, 11.7, fourth. And you go look at that and, it's like, why, with such good metrics, are they only sixth? Probably has to actually do with a bit more of a supply issue. Their inside 50s was only 10th in the competition with 50.6.
Mm-hmm.
And they struggle to generate set shots per inside 50. So 44.7, which is 11th. So when you consider that their marking rate's so high, you got to assume, and this is where I'm going to get to some of the problem with the Giants, is the two main things. They struggle to get the ball inside 50, and they struggle to get good entries inside 50. Because, when you saw them, there were a lot of, sort of hat kicks inside. Even their offensive one-on-one win rate being very medium. So even when they were able to generate turnovers, I think they had a decent, turnover differential.
Yeah.
I didn't put it on, which normally means it's around the middle. So even when they did get that, even with such powerful forwards in the lead, they couldn't exactly convert that to shots either. So you see there, very powerful offense, just with some tinkering, but you can tell they got the pieces in there. And normally I go to defense straight away, and then I want to go to the movement stats, because this is where I think that they can improve on next year, because, as I said, on paper, they have I'd say a pretty decent midfield, but unfortunately there's just a lot of inefficiencies that sort of let them down,
Yeah.
and it leads to a lack of supply. And the first of all is obviously the clearances. They were 37.4, which is 8th in the league,
Mm-hmm.
and then the clearance differential, which is 17th, which is a 2.1 loss. So the other teams averages 2.1 more clearances than they do. But the post clearance contested possession differential is 4.1. So they have some good structure. It's just the clearances themselves and struggling to get first hands on the ball. So they have to do a lot of pressure work to then get the ball back.
Mm-hmm.
Disposals in itself, though, they get a high amount of them. 372.5, which is second in the league, and the differential is first with 26.3. Obviously, though, that normally means you're a handballing team, because obviously if you handball a lot more, you tend to get more disposals, which is reflected by having the worst kicking percent in the AFL. Again, it's not technically a bad stat. I didn't put it in red, but it's 56.1, which is the worst in the league in terms of how often they choose to kick. They have the 14th most meters per disposal at 16.1. Their meters gain differential, it's still okay. 123.2, which is 8th in the league.
Mm-hmm.
But as we said, the biggest thing about the Giants is that doesn't convert to territory, because their inside 50 differential is a 4 loss, which is 14th in the league. And, as I mentioned before, if that was 0, with how efficient their offense is, and in a moment we're going to get to how efficient their defense is, you can see a big turnaround in score coming to the Giants. Like, that's an area where if you can get a tiny tweak, remember they already finished 4th in the league this year.
Mm-hmm.
This is like where some upside might be coming from next year. I already mentioned about the tackles. First in the league, 67. Opposition marks, they're great at preventing them. They only allow 80.6 per game, which is first.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a positive marking differential at 7.6 gained, which is third. Contested mark differential, a fair bit comes from the forward line, but still pretty impressive around the ground. 3.1 more than their opponents at first. And the hardball they get the most of them. 25.7 at first. Again, though, with a part of their scrappiness, A lot of those might be, gathering either from dump kicks or, handballs that miss the targets. But with the pressure they allow too, they're also good at, I think that's where they get a lot of their intercepts from, is putting tackling pressure on their opponents, forcing their opponents to take dump kicks because they find it hard to get a target, and then working it back. So I think that's the overview for their midfield. I will say, just as an overview, because this isn't going to get represented in any stats, because a lot of their movement's been known as the Orange Tsunami, as you will be well aware. They go on about it a lot in their media. But it's very weird because GWS, they're not very much a back half team. They get a lot of chip kicks. They like working it out, but for the most part, it doesn't actually come at a very high success rate. Because if they were, they'll be getting a lot more inside 50s. Because the opposition get a few balls against them. As I said, they lose the clearances. The ball gets kicked out into their defense a fair bit with that inside 50 differential. So, I find a lot of what the Giants do in the middle, it's very, I would like to say it's patient, but it's not like a Freo sort of patience where they do actually find avenues to break in. I feel like they just work it, sort of grind it so much until, as I said, they just kick it into their forward 50 to where their forwards still generally get the job done, just because it's a pretty insane forward line. Which, I don't know. It's sort of hard because they were a good team, but I think that's one area in their midfield which they were fairly lacking.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and especially when you consider the players that got in there, your Josh Kelly, your Tom Greens, Stephen Cornelio obviously had a few injury-affected years, but, even your Peatlings, your Wares, all those sort of players, like, they're all fairly decent bodies. They're good at winning the ball, but they just don't have much polish to their game. Like, Kelly's really the only one, and even he can get a bit inefficient depending on how the game's going. So we'll go back to positive, though, because their defense, again, sort of like their forward line, if they didn't have so much to work with the loss of possession inside 50, that would be one of the best defenses in the league. Goals against, 11.7, pretty middling, ninth. You expect the Giants to be a bit better considering the talent they got there. But when you look at like the individual stats, goals assist against, 7.6, which is first in the league. They allow the least amount of them. Goals per inside 50 against, 21.4 chance of getting a goal per inside 50. That's second in the league. Opposition marks per inside 50 is 18.7, which is first in the league. Opposition ground ball gets is where they're sort of a bit more vulnerable. That's 18.4 at 16th. And obviously what I was meaning before, the main thing against them was just how many shots that oppositions were able to generate. And they generated 25.5 shots per game against GWS's defense, which is 14th. So again, they have a decent one-on-one loss rate, middle of the pack, 27.1 11th. But on the flip side, they get the most defensive 1v1s in the competition at 13.3. And this is what I was sort of talking about before, where, GWS generates a few turnovers. I don't really get that much from them.
Yeah.
Their opponents, though, they can tend to expose them a fair bit. That's where a lot of scoring comes from. I don't think it's as high because, again, it's more sort of like a lot of the opportunities. Because, again, like, their normal structure is absolutely fantastic. But when they do get their opportunities, they're more likely to convert from it. So it's like not as high as other teams' turnover against score. But it's where teams are going to get that easy score against GWS.
Yeah, agreed.
And also they've got a pretty high defensive pressure act at 145.5, which is tied third in the league. So, yeah, as I said, overall, I think, as I said, there's a lot of good things there, and they're clearly like a top team from this.
Mhm.
But definitely what they have to work on is ironically enough that transition. As I said, they've got to get more from their own disposals and prevent the ball coming back with interest and so often as well.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. So how are they going to achieve this? We're going to have a look at the list changes
Well,
from
it's debatable
2024.
if they're going to achieve, because I
Sorry.
mean, all they really gained, I mean, apart from
Yeah.
their draft hand, and all they really gained is like a massive benefit is Jake Stringer, which is only going to help the forward line. That doesn't help any of their issues. Maybe help a little bit of their issues in the midfield because Jake Stringer is known as a mid forward. But that doesn't help any of their backline issues at all, unless
No, and
the players that they picked up from the draft will fill out in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think I got a couple of midfielders. Because I'm not a huge draft head, like I know in some of them, I think they got a defensive player, a couple of midfielders, and then say that's Hannaford, Oliver, and Angove.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm not too sure about the rest of them. I think one of them was from WA. I think that was Angove, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, so as I said, if they are looking to get pieces, especially when you consider some of their outs, oh, sorry, I haven't actually gone through it. So the draft is Oliver Hannaford at pick 18, Harry Oliver pick 19, Cody Angove at pick 24, Jack O at pick 36, Logan Smith, which is an academy pick, at pick 71, and as a Cat B rookie, they get Josiah Delana. And out of the GWS side is Isaac Cumming by free agency to Adelaide, James Peatling trade to Adelaide, Harry Perryman free agency to Collingwood, and Nick Haynes free agency to Carlton. So although there weren't, apart from Peatling, I don't think a lot of them were utilised week in, week out.
I
Probably
agree.
Isaac Cumming probably could have seen a bit more
Haynes
time
and
on the field.
Perryman probably would have been gone on anyway because of their age. They're coming into their twilight years. But Peatling was the one probably with the most upside that might hurt them a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. But it was in areas where they could see, especially when you're talking about ball movement. So, it's sort of hard to judge. Is it good moving on these players because it hasn't been working as much for you? Or, are you rubbing a bit of depth in an area where you might need it? Who knows? We'll talk about that in a bit. But also delisted was Cooper Hamilton, everyone's favorite social media manager.
However,
and Braden Bruce. Oh, sorry.
Cooper Hamilton was brought back, but not as a player. He's now basically working full time in the social media team and the marketing team, which I mean, good on him. I don't think he's officially retired himself as a footballer, but everyone at GWS loves him, and everyone loves the work that he was given with the social media team. So
yeah, and it's good for him. He gets a bit of a transition. He'll probably still focus on state league and hope he gets picked up, but he'll still have that fallback.
Yeah.
So again, we might not see the last of him on the AFL field, but for now he's delisted. And Braden Bruce, sort of just a player as a backup ruck that was sort of always stated for a bit better things than he actually got to do, because he was Gawn's backup. Everyone was saying, actually, I think he started at North Melbourne, then went to Melbourne.
It does sound familiar under North.
Yeah. Anyway,
I'll do a quick Google search.
Yeah, so they lost him, which I don't think they'll end up needing. They got a fair few stole stock. And retired is Adam Kennedy. I'm pretty sure was a defender, but I might be wrong on that.
Oh, he's from Townsville. First time learning of that. Yes, he did play for North under Goldstein. Then he went to Melbourne for 2 years, and then he joined GWS for 3 years.
Yeah.
In total, he played only 28 games so far.
Yeah. So yeah, Adam Kennedy, again, another defensive stock. So even though, like as he said, a lot of them were aging, it's still players that they're looking to replace, but they are coming a bit thinner down there. So that's just something to note. I don't think it'll be a huge issue, but in terms of like our season can change, maybe a few blackline injuries could be a spot where their season derails. Hopefully not. Who knows? Anyway, as I like to do, I like to go on the fringes to look at some important players that I think might contribute to some areas that they're either lacking or just their personal growth might help the team as much as possible. So we're going to start with Finn Callaghan, inside and outside midfielder for GWS. And I think we talked about him a bit at the back of the podcast. He had a few good games at the end of the year.
He did.
I think he also started off as a bit of a sub use. Sorry.
No, you're good. Sorry, all I was just agreeing with you that we did talk about him.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. So yeah, again, GWS's midfield stock, we talked about last year, it wasn't great, had a few injuries, and they couldn't really find enough pieces to get consistency out of it. But again, Callaghan was trusted with more centre bounce attendances as the year came on, play inside and on the wing. And I think the most important thing, as I said to him, for the Giants, is to find the next best support behind Green and Kelly. Because, as we mentioned, Cornelia is getting older.
Yep.
Green with an E sort of spends a bit less time in the midfield.
More time.
They've already, taken just talked about him,
Peatling, yep.
Away from the mix. So, as I said, you're starting to get into your Jacob Wares. If you're playing Toby Bedford in the middle as a pure tagger, but if you do, you're playing a lot more defensively and stuff like that. So Finn Callaghan, I think we're going to see him have a bit more focus next season as a pure inside midfielder. He's still pretty young. I think he's like 23, 24. Younger than that.
Yeah, he's like early to mid-20s, I believe.
Yeah, so as I said, when your body gets a bit more tank and all that sort of stuff, that's when you start to get into the real guts of the inside midfielder. I've got it here. He's 21 years of age. He's on 50 games. So, that's about the sort of experience that you want. Pretty tall as well, 192 centimeters, 86 kilograms. So, as I said, and it's sort of, again, what you're sort of missing. If you want to get your clearances up, it sometimes helps to have just, even if they don't get it themselves, that bigger body to try and outmuscle the opponent's best ball winners. Because, as I said, you don't want to get pushed out of the contest too much. As I said, Josh Kelly, he's a great ball winner, but that's more due to his smarts and ground ball gets. So, again, I think that's why I picked Finn Callaghan for that. Now we're going to Aaron Cadman. Again, pretty much of a bit more focus on him as a player, key forward. But I think at the end of the last year, he started to show why he was the number one pick at the tail end.
Agreed.
With sort of, because it wasn't just his, because his marks in like inside 50 and all that, they were good, but you know what I mean? They weren't as developing now. I think that will be an area, if he can improve on that, he'll be a really solid threat. But what I was very impressed was how he adapted when the ball hit the ground. He's a tall player, but he can still get the crumbing contests. So, as I said, even if Hogan gets a bit more attention this year, you're not only looking at Stringer and Daniels on the ground. Daniels? Yeah, Brent Daniels.
Brent Daniels.
I was thinking Caleb for some reason. We'll talk about him soon.
Yeah, we will.
But yeah, so you've also got Aaron Cadman. So, you're not only, and that helps Hogan too, because not only does it mean that, if you double team Hogan, you free out Cadman, but you're also thinking, do I put my most athletic player on a player like Cadman? Because sometimes, normally double teams, you have like one faster player, good intercept defender, can run in, rebound. But if that draws away, then Aaron Cadman gets freed up for like longer leads. And they're already good forward marking inside 50, and that can possibly improve even further. So that's why I highlighted Aaron Cadman.
I completely agree with that sentiment because, we talked about him a lot, especially in the back half of the season, as just how much development he was getting and how much better he was being utilized up in that forward line, especially when he wasn't injured. He was able to work so well with Hogan, both on just a distribution level and just bringing ball to ground when they couldn't mark it. And granted, their ground ball gets weren't always the greatest, but that forward line was still extremely potent, especially with Brent Daniels at their feet. So being able to have Stringer up there as well is going to make it even better.
Exactly. And, as you mentioned, like, I know you're not a fan of Jake Riccardi, but I think at this point, with Callum Brown as well, like, those are two players that are just going to be number 3 forwards. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
pretty
Like,
much.
you know what you sort of expect from that. They're okay marks inside 50. They'll get you a few goals here and there, but they're not going to be the sort of players you rely on. So the better that Cadman gets, the more that your offense isn't quite as hurt by playing players like Brown and Riccardi, who I think probably, because as I said, the reason why they're not so good at ground balls is because they're often playing all 4 of these players. I think they can almost afford to just play 3 of them next season,
Yeah, it's what
depending
I
on
was
how they want to
kind of
structure
thinking
up.
the same thing, that maybe up forward um they have Brown. This is like not specifically in this order, but like they have Brown,
Yeah,
Stringer, Hogan, Cadman, Daniels, and probably Toby Green as like their key 6 in the
yeah.
forward line, and then
Well, I
probably
said,
maybe someone on the bench to rotate.
yeah, well, I'm about to talk about the next player who missed a few games, but will sort of rotate through that forward midfield spot with Toby Green, and that's Stephen Cornelio. Obviously, he was very on-off in season 2024, a bit of a drop in form, but a lot of that was the injury, prevented him from injecting his sort of aggressive-minded ball use. And I think, when I talked about that midfield, I think a player like Stephen Cornelio was sort of missing because, again, he's not going to fix the clearances, but he's a very smart, link up for midfield forward ball user who gets involved in a lot of scoring. So I think if he's healthy next season, I think we can see a bit of improvement in that area. I know as a veteran, you should be sort of expecting that, and if not, he may just be getting a bit older. But I think he's still got a bit left in him. And I think also the other thing too, with how much tall depth and Stringer, because as I said, my theory is they're going to play Stringer really deep.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I said, try and keep that ball locked inside 50, get a few more ground ball gets. The good thing is, like, having a player like Stephen Killia, he loves drifting in to the top of the 50 arc. So even if you get like a mid-entry, it's like a boundary side kick, you still have to put pressure on the defenses because otherwise you might get a kick out 45 meters out. Stephen Cornelio, he loves those sort of shots. He's very smart at finding that sort of space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can just, lift a few more goals by having a player like him. Talking about a player that I forgot, not sort of forgot, but is an inside midfielder, Ryan Angwin, who's sort of been a bit in the mix. I think the Giants probably wanted him a bit further along than he has been so far, but he could come in to make an impact into that inside midfield.
Mm-hmm.
He broke his collarbone in his debut game against GWS in 2022. Played a bit in 2023 and then not that started in 2024. I think he played 4 games, a couple on the bench. On the substitute, I should say.
Oh, yeah.
And, but when you look at GWS's age profile, they've got a lot of young players in the wings, and it's a lot of also prospective talent as well. So I think you're looking at like a player like Ryan Angwin, when you're looking at the players that are going to replace a Isaac Cumming or a Harry Perryman, and you're like, oh, where they're going to get him from? They still have a few players in that list where I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be Angwin. I have heard good things about him. I don't know exactly a lot about him, but I would just say keep an eye on him for 2022 because he could be the sort of player that makes a lot of those losses seem less bad. And finally, I talked about a bit their movement from halfback being a bit uninspired at times. So I want to highlight Lockie Ash, again, another person who I think we talked about a lot more at the end of the year as a general defender. He's got a fairly good pace and he's got pretty good ball use. And the one thing I want to see is that I'd like to say for a while now, GWS has been very spotty from the back half. Like, they can get it going, but they struggle a bit. So I know it's not all the halfbacks' fault, and I'm not saying, like, I think Lockie Whitfield gets a bit I don't want to say overrated, but sometimes I think he's not as damaging as people say he is.
Yeah.
So I want to see him share those responsibility with a young player like Lockie Ash, you know, just so they can mix out. Like Lockie Whitfield, he can take the game on sometimes. He can do those sort of dump kicks. But also, you know, the switch to try and get that fast rebound from the backup because they're so good at rebounding. You know, and they can, you know, get those intercept marks. So if they can get a two-pronged sort of attack down there, which, you know, they sort of have with Connor Idun, but, you know, I always think Connor Idun's a bit of a better small forward defender. You know, it's a bit like Isaac Quaynor at times.
Yeah.
Like, he can be good with his ball use, but he's a bit iffy. So I'd rather someone like Lockie Ash take on more of that role. Have that one key small defender. Again, when you're like locked into that role, maybe you get a few more ground ball gets in the back 50 as well. But yeah, as I said, so Lockie Ash, I'd like to see him naturally develop his game, as well as share those exiting responsibilities with Lockie Whitfield.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right. So, new faces. It's one pretty obvious one. It's the package, Jake Stringer. And I think most people, it's been talked about a lot. I think most people are fairly reasonable with expectations about him. Often seen at Essendon, he comes very in and out of the side. In and out of games. He had a very good year last year, but it wasn't very consistent.
Yeah.
So not very good for Essendon. I think it's something that sort of benefits both teams. I think Essendon need to move on. But for GWS, it just provides a bit of spark at ground level. Like, again, the way that they play Toll, if they do continue being Toll, they at least have a designated person. That's why I say he plays deep. So he's always there collecting, because if he comes up too high, you're not going to improve in that area. You're just going to get his distribution. And his distribution's a bit iffy. It's not the most efficient kick.
Well, to be fair, I mean, you look at the players he was stuck with on Essendon. It wasn't entirely his fault.
Yeah. No, well, as I said, that's not what, you know. It's more just, you know, as I said, I think the system here just suits, you know what you're going to get out of Stringer. He's older. But if you can, like, let that veteran just play his game, you're going to get some good things out of him. And I don't think it's going to be a case where he gets 40-odd goals like he did last year. But I can definitely see, like, you know, him getting maybe like a 25 to 30, but GWS going from, like, 6th to a top 4 offense in the league by having him. So... yeah, so overall, pretty positive about his impact. I wouldn't think the world of him, but he is going to be very useful.
Agreed. I think he's definitely a great pickup for GWS and definitely something that will more complement Hogan. And again, as we just talked about, Hogan, Cadman, Brent Daniels, and the like up forward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, summing it all up, we'll go to the reasons for optimism. And, you know, links to what we just talked about. They've bolstered their forward line. Their defense looks to improve with a healthier Sam Taylor, and their midfield with a healthier Stephen Cornelio. They've got a lot of young talent, which they used last year, despite some obvious flaws. They still managed to get 4th. So even, because again, I talked about how, you know, they have some flaws, younger players. You finish 4th in the league. Like, that's pretty good. It's sort of hard. Like, there's other lists that maybe looks more exciting, but the way GWS plays, they're still getting it done. And I think there's room for improvement. So hopefully they'll get that done next year. And as I said, despite having that young list, they have a wealth of experience in every line. As I mentioned, Hogan and Stringer up forward, Ward, Kelly, Cornelio, and Green in the midfield, and Whitfield, Himmelberg, and Buckley in defence. So despite having the 13th oldest list and the 14th most experienced list, they have a really solid heads to rely on. And, you know, as I said, it's sort of funny when we get into these list analysis things. Like, everyone's going on about, like, teams that haven't been doing well with, like, youngish lists. And then, like, you know, they just shrug their shoulders at something like a GWS. But when you look at their profile, like this is a team that can really improve next year. I'm not sure if they do, but man, there's like a lot of upside
Yeah,
to
100%.
have.
And like, there's nothing,
Yeah.
and I do kind of say this about North Melbourne's list as we're going to talk about them shortly.
Mm,
Um, but their lists are fairly comparable because they now have a bunch of veteran talent and a bunch of good leadership qualities in that
mm.
veteran talent. But their is still extremely young in like around the same areas as to where GWS currently is. So it's all about
Yeah,
working with that
I'm not
balance.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if you put it in the notes, but I'm pretty sure North Melbourne are 17th, 18th.
Something like that. I didn't
Um,
put it in the notes, but they
and
are like fairly young. They're down the
yeah,
bottom of the
yeah.
list somewhere
I think yeah, Richmond have a bit more experience, but are younger, obviously due to the
due to the massive
a lot
draft
of
hand
draft
that we
picks.
had.
Yeah, exactly. I might have got that wrong, but even then, I think it would still be like 16th. So,
Yeah, I
as I
mean,
said, theoretically, that's only 2 or 3 spots away.
yeah, exactly. Like
It'll only be like a difference of
these like younger
point
lists are
0.3.
all extremely close together
Yeah,
in terms of average.
yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
So,
back to
as I said,
GWS.
yeah, anyway. And as I said, GWS, very consistent. They had some of the better loss margins in the league, with the only 30-point plus loss coming from the Bulldogs in that blustering game in Mars Stadium. I'm not sure if you could say that there was a 2 or 3 goal grease, but you can sort of just expect a bit of jank in that one. So the Giants, really good in staying in games against the best teams in the league. And so far, when you compare to other teams near them, your Cats, your Lions, your Swans, and Port especially, like all of those teams have had some matchups where they haven't really liked either an opponent or a play style. Where GWS isn't really about that because they've managed to get a lot of control. They're very defensively focused, so
Mm-hmm.
while they haven't been efficient, at the same time they never get blown out all that much. So again, all it takes is that tiny bit of efficiency click, and you see them at the top bit of the ladder.
And their defensive game style probably stems from the defensive play style that Dimmer coached when Adam Kingsley was at Richmond. Because with King as being the GWS coach, he's taken a lot of influence from, obviously what he's learned under Dimmer. And a lot of that was a defensive minded play style, which is where the areas of GWS succeed.
Yeah, and as I said, like if they were a better scoring team off turnover, we'll just call them one of the best you know, what do you call it? I guess I wouldn't say like gritty team, but you know what I mean? Like one of the biggest grinding teams sort of in the league. Like those Richmonds that scored, made their opponents make mistakes and then pounds.
Yeah.
And then otherwise just sort of controlled the ball, made sure the game never got too out of hand. Like it's very similar in terms of that, but as I said, it's really just missing that transition that Richmond could get from their quality halfbackers. And obviously a bit of wing performances from players that just did their roles, like your Camadine McIntoshes, your Shane
Yes.
Edwards.
Yes.
There's another
And the
one of
like.
them. But yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, we got Richmond next week, so we'll move on. Continue with GWS. Um, Reasons for pessimism, because we talked a lot of good, but there definitely is flaws in their list. And one of the things is, even if GWS can find a way to increase their inside 50s, it wasn't as efficient as their high marking prowess. So a lot of it was due to the fact that Hogan was generally slotting most of his efforts. And because he was getting those marks so close to goals, as I said, they had easy shots. You know what I mean? They so on one hand you could say, oh, high goal assists, all that sort of stuff. But again, when they're not getting scores off turnovers, when they're relying on, the overhead sort of game,
Mm-hmm.
if they get found out, scoring can dry up really quickly. We've seen that with teams like Melbourne, Collingwood even. I know Collingwood weren't very scoring in 2024, but 2023 when they won the premiership. But you could definitely see that sort of difference between 2024 and 2023.
Yeah.
So again, you could see that dip, and I think it would come if that board line doesn't produce not as much because it's very hard to replicate, but similar high marking numbers. So again, why I think Karen Cadman's so important as well.
Mm-hmm.
Also mention again that loss of depth, especially in that halfback range. So even if their best 22 are good at moving the ball from a halfback, all it takes is a couple of kids to get, a couple of players to go out, a couple of raw kids to get in there, and all of a sudden they're struggling again. Especially again with the outside midfielders, they probably, only playing one kid in the inside midfielder this year, who'll get rotated again, who I thought was Finn Callahan. But yeah, as I said, they're going to still need to do that. Again, Cornelia, he's not going to be a 50 to 60% attending centre bounces. So again, they've got the outside midfield that's a bit vulnerable. They got the inside midfield a bit vulnerable. They got their halfbackers, which again, Lockie Ash, sort of, you got to rely on him. And you can't really afford an injury to players like Idan or even Whitfield himself, who's getting older. So there is a bit of question marks in depth on that area. And finally, we can't really gloss over how bad those late season fade outs were for GWS. And, I hate thinking that moments like this can define you as a team, but sometimes it sort of does. And I think what it highlights is just sort of no matter how good GWS can look, you always feel like you're never too far away from them. And if they don't patch up those problems, if they still look like that next year, they might actually see a few more of those close losses slide away because teams will look at that tape. They'll feel more confident against them.
Yeah, they will.
So, it's sort of a bit hard because, it's still a good season, but they're going to have to work extra hard to prevent those, that sort of mindset from, going from like the hunter to the hunted sort of thing. Because again, they're a young team, they're overperforming, and they should not be ashamed of those two losses. But Kingsley definitely has to keep on top of that group because again, confidence is a huge thing for these young teams. And they're going to have a lot of players believing to, again, replicate the season that they sort of had last year.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, as I said, they've got to keep their head up. I think they will. But as I said, it just adds a bit of variability-ness to, the lower half of what I think that will happen to them next year, which will go to the verdict. I mentioned, I like GWS a lot. They have some problems. They have a rebuilding list. But I think, they've already proven they can be a top 4 contender. And I just feel like, it's sort of hard because, this top 4, there wasn't that much difference between like 4th, 5th, 3rd, and, 6th and all
Yeah,
that.
apart from the
Even down
top
to
two, it was
10th.
extremely close in the top 8.
Yeah. So I feel like they can edge towards like a Port Adelaide or Sydney type season where they only drop, maybe 5 or 6 games. If they can lock down at home, they travel pretty well. They should back up their season. I've put them on the predicted range as possible 1st even to 6th, which puts them at a finals lock. And my gut feel says they will finish the season 3rd. So if you look at that, we'll do a little refresher for those listening. We have at number 1, Geelong Cats. At number 2, Brisbane Lions. Just placed in at 3rd, GWS Giants. 6th, we've got the Fremantle Dockers. 8th, we've got the Collingwood Magpies. 9th, the Carlton Blues. 10th, the Adelaide Crows. 13th, the Gold Coast Suns. And 15th, the Essendon Bombers. So that is 3 out of my predicted top 4. Already on there. Blazy, do you think they'll finish top 4?
I definitely think there's a chance. Do I think they'll finish top 8? Yes. I think I agree that they're definitely a top 8 finals lock. I don't think they're going away anytime soon in that regard. Do I think they're a hard finish on top 4? I think in terms of how other teams have also like restructured and rebuilt their lists, I think it's going to be again like this, like the season just gone. It's going to be extremely close, at least in the top like 3 to 8. I think top two could genuinely like still blitz out of the water as it did for most of last season. So I think they could at least skew again, yeah, between third and sixth. But it's still definitely highly probable that they will finish top four.
All right. Is there anything else you want to say about GWS? I think we've
Uh,
covered that pretty much.
no, I think we've summed it up pretty well, which means we get to move on to probably the most exciting team of 2024, Hawthorn. And
Yes.
as we all know, it became the Hawk Ball this season with the likes of the Wizard leading the charge, and and at the start of last season, I say the start, like in the early rounds of last season, all we wanted to see from this team as they went 0-5 to start their season is just give us something. All we wanted was something, some sort of vision, or some sort of signs that there was a vision and a good plan ahead for Sam Mitchell. And the same can be said, and I said this also about North Melbourne. That side we didn't get, and we will get onto that. But for Hawthorn, we just wanted to see something in these early rounds. They went 0-5 pretty much just straight away. Wasn't a great look. But again, as we sort of got to like as we started to approach the mid-season, things started to look a bit better. They got some players back that they really needed. They had a little bit of a restructuring, moved some players around, and then all of a sudden they look like a completely different team. So, again, as I said, on paper, Hawks look 2024 Hawks look decent, but they had a ton of question marks across the list. No one really expected them to crack top 12. I remember early season predictions, most people didn't put them even in the top 8 at all, let alone top 10.
I put him in the bottom four.
Psyrick being one of them. Was a little bit more hopeful. Although I said the same thing about the Suns, and I was extremely wrong about that, which is probably a good thing. Um, the start of the season was a rocky run. Again, 0-5 to start it off, but also they were still missing Mitch Lewis and Will Day. To say of which they are still missing Mitch Lewis and Will Day because they're both still injured, despite coming back into the side. They both went pretty much straight back out. So their first win came from a close match against North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium, which I also talk about this match specifically on the north side of things because it was fairly hopeful on the north side of things, but for Hawthorn it was desperately needed that they got that win. And then they had big wins over Brisbane, Adelaide, and GWS that we finally started to see what Sam Mitchell and James Sicily saw in the young players that they had brought in. And then they went on to have an incredible second half after the bye, losing to only Geelong and GWS. I believe they went on like a 7-game win streak or something like that, which was like
I think it's 6.
Whatever it says there. Essentially, they had pretty much from the bye, they went like 5 or 6 games straight on a really solid win streak. Showed some blistering good form. They only lost to 2 of the top 8 teams at the time, being GWS and Geelong, as I just mentioned. And it pretty much burst them into the top 8, made them a genuine premiership contender. The introduction of players like Kel Shadir, Nick the Wizard Watson, Jack Ginnivan, and Massimo D'Ambrosio, as well as the emergence of existing players like Jai Newcomb, Dylan Moore, Sam Frost, and their rock that I forgot to mention, that I'm very annoyed that I forgot to mention.
Jordan Meek.
Thank you. Lloyd Meek. Lloyd Meek as well. Alongside Sicily, of course, the fiery hothead that would always get into trouble, but was always right there, fighting for them. He just made the entire season an absolute thrill to watch. Of course, veteran Luke Bruce, being the super sub, playing most of the games starting from the bench, but always would come in when requested, mostly for Jack Gunston, being the other veteran who was kind of rotating in and out with him. And just combined, like that entire team became extremely threatening. And we even saw it in the finals games that they played against the Doggies. They absolutely trounced them by over 30 points. And then obviously everyone knows they lost to Port over in Adelaide, an extremely close game. We also know that there were some words said after that game that made big news. But yeah, overall, I think Hawthorn fans, after the couple of years that they had trying to rebuild and just couldn't really get anywhere, they were extremely happy with what they saw this season, even if the season did start pretty rough. And there's definitely a brighter future for Hawthorn than there is maybe for any other team in the league at the moment.
I mean, I'll tend to agree on that. I think if you're looking at in terms of 3 to 4 years, I definitely would put them at least in like A tier or something. Like, if you put them in thirds, you're looking at the best four possible future prospects when you look at their list. And again, sort of like GWS, when you look at how young they are, what they were able to do was very impressive. And you think, as I said, I'm a bit skeptical on some of the moves, making them like 100% unbeatable, whatever. But I do think like there's just something about a well-coached team, the power to pull players, and getting the most out of the young talent they've got. It makes them a very scary prospect, not just for next year, but the years after as well.
Absolutely. So now we'll move on to the statistical side of things, which I will let you lead.
Yeah, because as you know, I'm a bit more of the stats digger, and one thing that is very clear is just how much of an improvement from 2023 to 2024 there was. And I won't quite go through the specific stats straight away. I want to compare first to last year. But when we look at the Hawthorn midfielders, they've got sorry. In terms of players, I should say, their top 5 players for score involvements were Dylan Moore at the age of 25. Sorry, the oldest of the top 5. Sorry about this.
That's
I've
right.
written this very weirdly. Was Dylan Moore, and an average age of 21.8. So that's Dylan Moore, Jai Newcomb, Connor McDonald, Jack Ginnivan, and Nick Watson. So when you're talking about the powerfulness of this young list. Again, not one of those. You wouldn't even say any of those players are in their prime yet, and they're getting a lot done for them. And again, their bowl use has turned around from being a bottom team. I think they were, 17th or 16th% in terms of defensive efficiency in 2024. 2023, I should say. And then that just swung. I think I've written it on the list, but no, I haven't. But it is up in the upper region of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I said, it's just they were very solid. We'll start with their offense. I'm going to go into the normal thing because I don't think I quite. Yeah, anyway, so their goals for this year, they finished tied 6th in the league. Rapid improvement from last year, 13.2. Goal assists, 9.4, 4th in the league. Goals per inside 50, 24.6 at tied 6th in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Marks inside 50, 5th in the league with 12.8. Mark inside 50 rate, 23.8, which is 6th in the league. Which I just want to say for that forward line, with no recognized key forward, is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, their closest kind of player that could be recognized as a key forward is Mabi Chol. And even then, he still mixes him into the ruck every now and then.
Yeah, exactly. And Mabi Chol is really more just of a pace setter, really. So, the fact that Kal Shadir was able to get so many marks inside 50 in his first year, the fact that Jack Ginnivan and Nick Watson were able to get so many leads inside 50, so that's marks on leads, was very good. And, as I said, I just think that's an incredible stat for when you look at their forward line on paper. Yeah, so inside 50s in general, they were pretty middle of the pack, 53.9, which is 7th in the league. But again, when you compare it to that turnaround, like they were pretty poor. Like when you look at the meter gain differential from last year to this year, we're talking about a difference of almost, I think it's almost 500 meters. So yeah, as I said, it's absolutely incredible. Much better than last year. Tackles inside 50, 11.2 at 6. So obviously with those small, talented forwards, great on the ground. Offensive one-on-one wins, though, percentage, 24.1, which is 15th in the league, and offensive one-on-ones, 10.4, which is 9th. So either, as I said, those sort of contested marks or scoring from intercept, they didn't quite generate as much as the top teams in terms of that regard. But otherwise, in terms of, standard forward lines, it was pretty decent.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But it's not entirely all about the negative side of things. I mean, their movement is absolutely incredible all throughout.
Yeah, and I think this is where a lot of Hawthorn's generators come from. Like, they were run through the middle. And it went from, as I said, those players like Jai Newcomb, Connor McDonald, all that sort of thing. That's why they were so heavily involved in score involvements. Because a lot of it was from the middle. Their possessions, 355.4, which is tied sixth in the league. The possession differential is the same at sixth, 21.6 gain. But their meters difference gained. That Hawk Ball, that fast movement, 329.1, which is first in the league. So they outmetered their opponents a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Their intercept generation was pretty mid, 66 at 11th, and I sort of put that on there to complement the one-on-one win percentage. But their intercept turnover differential was still pretty high, 3.4, which is second. So they took a lot of safe possessions, which we saw last year. But because they were pulling it off enough, they weren't getting burnt as much. So while they could still improve on that generation, I think Sam Mitchell will much rather see this improvement and take that to heart to know that the efforts that he put in last year when he was struggling, 2 years ago, I should say, paid off in the 2024 season. And again, that's reflected in the turnover differential, 3.3 loss, which is second. So they had 3.3 less turnovers than their opponents.
Mm-hmm.
Their opponents' tackles was 66.1, which is 17th in the league. So they did hold on to the ball a bit. Again, high handballing team, that can happen. Their contested marks around the ground was a bit mid. Again, young bodies, not that surprising. 8.4, which is 15th in the league. Clearances, they were bang on in the middle. Bang on, not quite, but 36.7 at 10th. But again, they at least had good clearance differentials, 0.8 gain at 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Their loose ball get differential, and as I said, like all their ground stuff was absolutely fantastic. Loose ball gets differential, 6.8, first in the league. Hard ball get differential, 1.6, second in the league. Post clearance contested possession differential, 4.2, first in the league. Post clearance ground ball get differential, 5.4, first in the league. And as you mentioned, and this is the difference between a lot of teams that are like mid, young struggling teams, they get their good inside midfielders, but they don't have anything to complement them. But the difference with Hawthorn is they've got such good outside play as well that they're able to be so overwhelmingly solid and not get beaten in certain areas, especially while they're still young and developing. So while they do have those flaws, they have such good things in other areas where you just shrug your shoulders and go, well, that's not different to just any other team. You can't win every stat. Maybe they won't be like a big body team. They won't, so much, break loose all the tackles, be hard contested ball in the inside mids. But they're going to move the ball so well, it doesn't really matter because, the ball's just going to go from one end to the other. And if you don't score well against them, which we'll see in their defensive stat was pretty hard to do, you're going to get outscored.
Yeah.
So we'll head to the defense. Goals against, surprisingly, first in the league, 11th. I was that surprised, but pretty surprised it was first. There was, it should say tied first. I think there was 3 teams on 11 goals against. And the opposition goals per inside 50 was pretty high, though. So 23.2, 8th in the league. Opposition shots per inside 50 was a bit better, though, 46.6, which is 6th. And as you can imagine, the opposition X score per shot was pretty high. They had to have difficult shots. So that is 3.18, which is 4th in the league. And they denied a lot of set shots, so forced those general play shots. So the opposition set shots per inside 50, 43.7, which is 8th in the league.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm really trying to say there is yes, they did allow shots, and yeah, this wasn't like the most, you know, not indestructible defense, and especially we saw that early on when they were getting piles and piles of scores against them. But once they got it together, they found out how to make scoring tougher for the opposition, and that led to an eventual turnaround in that defense. And, it comes from, great intercepting players like Jack Scrimshaw,
Mm-hmm.
Josh Weddle, Sam Frost. Again, his disposal's not anything to, get too excited about, but he still was very solidly one-on-one defensively. And yeah, as I said, and you could tell, like, score from defensive half, they allowed the least in the league, 26.1, which is first. Their defensive one-on-one loss rate, second in the league, 21.4, which is second.
Mm-hmm.
And they only allowed 9.5 defensive one-on-ones per game at 13th in the league. So really, it came a bit from structure up the ground, but their defense was just holding up enough to where they were also taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
It was like the middle was so good that it was helping out the defense, but the defense was already pretty solid. But, as I said, defensive pressure acts 129.4, 16th in the league, and spoils 26.8, which is 17th, which I'm it's really a bit surprised at. I know they're pretty aggressive rebounders. Intercept defenders. Like, I know they were 11th, so they're only intercepts. Like, a lot of that was coming from the back half of the league, of the ground. But yeah, just didn't get as many spoils. So
I mean,
again,
as a stats tell, like they're much better in like a one-on-one sort of situation rather than an interceptor, like interceptor to be able to spoil sort of situation.
yeah, well, as I said, it's sort of like one of those things where, you know, well, because of the one-on-one lot, they were so low, because often you see intercept teams like that, because if you have someone defending, it becomes a 2-on-1.
Yeah.
So that sort of changes. But one-on-one, they were pretty solid anyway. So, they could win the one-on-one contest anyway. So, again, I'm not saying that the scores was anything. I was just a bit surprised to see it. Overall, though, I think, as I said, it could use some improvement. And I think, obviously, they've made some tune changes to reflect that. But overall, as I said, I think a lot of that a lot of their good stats came from their midfield. And then Sam Mitchell was just good enough to make every line do its job. And you had this well-oiled machine, and especially on that back half, it just created consistency out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
And as I said, it was, it was quite the shock to go from that, as you were saying, like a team where we were saying their prospects against Kangaroos were iffy to, oh yeah, we can take on the teams like, the Dockers, the Blues and all that, the Cats, and be favored to win. So,
and not to mention, I forgot to mention this in kind of like the main overview of all the games, but like they did also happen to interrupt, one of the biggest 300ths of our generation, being Dustin Muns. As much as they didn't, no one wanted them to play spoiler apart from Hawthorn fans. Like they had to play spoiler, and when they're in the form that they're in, they may as well.
Can't say that was a big scale play. Purely on stats, I can't say that was a big scale, but I know what you mean. Like they were pretty.
No, I mean you look
comprehensive.
at Richmond, and there was no way we are going to win that regardless of what happened.
Yeah, but as I said, they were pretty comprehensive against teams as well. Like, because I said they had some pretty big loss margins to start. Because you get like 55 against the Demons, 53 against the Suns, 36 against the Cats, 24 against the Bombers, who were pretty. I
mean, at the time, that was when the Essendon edge was big, and for the Melbourne game, that was when Melbourne were actually kind of working in their favor.
Oh yeah, I know, but I'm talking about big losses. Like you just didn't see that in the last half of the year. They either lost by a little amount, obviously the one exception being the Cats game, or they just blew other teams out. And I know they didn't have the hardest schedule coming home, but overall it was pretty impressive. Like that swing, in terms of like, if you look at average margin for the first half of the year to the second half of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if it was like one of the biggest turnarounds. I don't have a stat on that. That's just my gut feel.
I mean, you just eyeball that, and it's like that's basically what happened. Is they quickly became probably the most improved team in the competition.
Yeah, because not like Brisbane where they were narrowly losing to good teams. Like they were just flat out beat. So yeah.
Anyway,
I'll give it back to you.
Let's move on to the ins and outs. So all of the list changes. So in is the two big ones from the off season. Everyone knew about these, but it wasn't until the last minute that one of them was signed, being Tom Barras from West Coast. And then Josh Battle came over as a free agent from St Kilda. Both defenders, both going to be extremely important to that defensive backline. I will talk about that specifically a bit later. Then from the draft, they picked up Noan Raz at pick 35. Cody Anderson at pick 64 from the Academy selection. Mac Hill was category B rookie. And then Jamie Henry was also a category B rookie. Out is Josh Bennett's, Denver Granger Barras, both delisted. Cooper Stevens also delisted. Jack O'Sullivan delisted. Ethan Phillips delisted. Clay Tucker delisted. And then Chad Wingard hung up the boots. Port Adelaide and Hawthorn great. After what, 300 plus, almost 300 games, over 300 games. I can't remember.
Nah, it wasn't 300. It was injury prone.
Oh,
it would have been like
that's very true.
20 odd.
I know. He was. I think he was approaching like a big milestone, but I can't remember which. It might have been 250, but
I think it might have been 250. I definitely remember his 200. I want to say. I can't look at it now. Anyway, we've given him a farewell.
We have. But yeah, so they made some quote unquote big changes, but I don't think that's really super drastic. Like we already knew that they were going after Battle and Barras for most of the year. Primarily Battle because Battle was a free agent. And yeah, there's no downside to getting those two pickups.
Well, the minor downside is you've lost a bit of draft capital for this year. Obviously, they've only really picked an academy player. And Noah Miraz, I can't remember what his things were, but I'm sure Hawthorn faithful will tell you.
I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure Miraz is a midfielder, but I would have to double check on that. Anyway, so the players that I wanted to highlight going into 2025, I'm going to start with Massimo D'Ambrosio because he was an absolute steal from Essendon. Like, I can't believe they got away with getting him for that cheap. It was actually crazy. And he's pretty much straight up cemented himself as one of the best wingmen in the league. He averaged 21.1 disposals and 5 marks across the season, using his speed and agility to move the ball great distances. As we saw in the statistics, their ball movement is like, what was first, right?
Oh, depends how you want to define ball movement. But yeah, it was pretty good. Their wing was fantastic.
Well, yeah, there you go. And a lot of that came down to D'Ambrosio's usage of the ball. I pretty much watched him the entire second half of the season, and he just kept getting better and better. He's probably one of the best signings in the off season in terms of impact, because that was something that Hawthorn was really missing on the wing, was just like that player that had that massive impact. And D'Ambrosio, I should say, had that in spades, basically. Lloyd Meek is my next player.
I just want to add a couple of things.
No, go
on. In the last 10 games, they were the second best team for score origin from their defensive half, which sort of adds to that. And just about D'Ambrosio, I think, that also just comes from identifying players, because as you mentioned from Essendon as a steal, like, he still wasn't that hyped. Like, I know he's a bit on Supercoach and all that, but there was a bit of air about him, because at Essendon he was being played more as a small defender, and he was just getting beat. Again, Essendon's backline looked pretty bad then. It didn't improve then now, but when he's got like that defined role, they actually play to his strengths and then use others to cover that. He looked fantastic. So that's where you can get those sort of pickups and just look reinvented as a player, even though you're only just making minor changes to your game style.
Yeah, absolutely. Next on my list is Lloyd Meek. He became the spear in the ruck, breaking into the spot during the 2024 season. I think previously he was kind of in and out with injuries to kind of try to fight for that number one spot. But he managed to get straight in to the number one position, averaging 36.1 hitouts, 10.6 hitouts to advantage, 14.5 disposals, and 3.4 clearances from 21 games in 2024, which
Yeah, it
is
was a big step
in,
up from.
in comparison to other rucks in the league, that's like top five in terms of output.
Yeah, yeah. As I said, it was pretty fantastic, and as you said, it was a big step up from was it son of the CEO, Ned Reeves?
Yeah,
He sort of got pushed out of the spot, but when you look at the output, yeah, it was just a big step up in that area. And I know it didn't always translate from clearances, but in terms of again structure, I think that definitely helped.
definitely. And then obviously, I'm gonna talk about him, James Sicily. Absolute, the captain gets a little bit hot headed, has a bit of history with the MRO. However, he only missed games in 2024 due to injury, not actually MRO related issues. Although he did have a couple of run-ins. Um, he put in some incredible work in the backline. Occasionally rotated up forward and helped out up there when he knew the backline was safe. And averaged 21.5 disposals and 2.5 intercept marks last year. He is the glue that keeps pretty much the entire team together, and you can't fault like the work rate that he has.
So I got a question that I've actually been a bit keen because I read this a bit before and thought you might like this question.
Mm.
I imagine one of their defenders is going to move forward this year, and I know you were very keen on
Hardwick.
Hardwick, but is it Hardwick or Sicily that you may see as a full time? Because they could use the bigger body of Sicily, or I don't think they'll do both, but who knows? But
I
in
if if the backline is um like pretty solid without Sicily down there, I could see Sicily moving up forward as we've already seen him do quite a few times.
mm,
The only reason I would prefer Hardwick is because he was originally like trained as a forward, before slotting
so
into
Sicily,
defense. True, um, but I mean, Sicily is probably the player that would do it, especially considering they're going to
yeah.
need some help up forward if there's injuries. Um,
Yeah, and especially like against that Port game, remember he almost had the goal that came back for them. You know, he had one that he slotted through, one that he narrowly missed. So it was definitely a big threat in that last quarter.
yeah, it's crazy his flexibility, despite being a
Mm,
really solid defender at the same time.
yeah, so
And then last
just a bit of
player.
insight. Horse fans are probably excited about that flexibility after having like no
Oh
options
yeah,
to
absolutely.
run through.
Nothing wrong with having a really good swingman. Although
Yeah,
our one might be out for a couple of games, so we'll see.
we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
um, and then last player I want to talk about is Connor McDonald, who plays forward, sometimes drifts into the midfield. He definitely benefited a lot more from the revamp of the Hawks forward line, more than doubling his goal tally from 12 to 28 between 2023 and 2024. He also is averaging 17 disposals and 6.2 score involvements per game, which is, just one of those other players who does his role, fills it really well. Sure, the highlight might be on Watson and Ginnivan and Chol being like the
Well,
main
even
forward, but
even for his role, like Dylan Moore, like he got so much emphasis. But when you look at Connor McDonald's stats, it was a pretty spread effort. Like they got good supply those Hawthorn forward line. Like
absolutely. And yeah, their
even
midfielders
like
again are insane.
yeah, could you imagine like if GWS got that level? I know it doesn't happen because salary caps and all that, but honestly, you could almost imagine like the GWS being able to afford Hawthorn's midfield,
Could you imagine
and they would just improve so much.
how much more threatening
Oh,
Hawthorn would be if Mitch Lewis and Will Day weren't injured?
yeah, well, that's it. I mean, we saw a bit of it with Will Day, but I know what you mean as well. Like they've got a bit of potential coming back as well. So, I didn't mean to like compare them to GWS, saying
But they are
because
very similar in terms of just the way that whether they're structured.
well, yeah, as I said, it's just as I said, GWS have like covered their middling midfield with such a potent forward line, and this is sort of the opposite, where you got such a potent for midfield and making those young forwards get as much as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the new faces, of course, the two big ones from the offseason are Josh Battle and Tom Barras. Battle being a key defender is pretty much, I wouldn't say one of the biggest signings, because again, there are multiple big signings across 2024. We'll talk, we already talked about some of them with like the Fremantle related one. And then we'll talk about them a lot more when we get onto Richmond next week, because most of the big signings came from Richmond, let's be real. But then, yeah, having joined the Hawks as a free agent from St Kilda, he averaged 17.8 disposals, 3.8 spoils, which is something that the Hawks were lacking in 2024, and 2.6 intercept marks in 2024 with St Kilda. And then for Tom Barras, coming from the West Coast Eagles, he averaged 13.4 disposals, 7.2 spoils, with 19 in just one game a season prior, mind you. Granted, this is this is still in a period of time where West Coast are not good at all. But one thing that was always very good about West Coast is their defensive efforts, as we saw from McGovern and Barras, and 3.6 intercept marks in 2024. So again, two intercept defenders, very good with spoils, and that's something that the Hawks were very much lacking as we looked at the stats. So they'll pretty much come in and fill the roles and the holes that Hawthorn were lacking in.
It's going to be interesting because their defense was still pretty good, so there's going to push out some pretty talented person, but you can imagine just these two slotting right in, because they even have a bit of synergy, because Josh Battle is probably the better one-on-one defender. But Tom Barras, he comes in, again, like there's 7.2 spoils. I would be surprised if a lot of those were like not one-on-one contests, because he drifts in, he's good at killing the ball in the contest, which he needed to do a lot at West Coast, like no lie. But as I said, so when you got that strength, when you got like Josh Battle and Scrimshaw being able to do what they do, and then Tom Barras just coming in, intercepting, spoiling, whatever, it would just prevent those marks against them inside 50 from happening, which again was another thing that they could probably improve a tiny bit on.
Yeah, absolutely. On to my reasons for optimism. And again, we were literally just talking about the backline, and that's where my first line leads. So the Hawthorn backline is shaping up to be one of the best in the competition. We'll obviously have to see how it performs to kind of rate it. If Battle and Barras kind of slot in perfectly, then if we have to compare it obviously to the other 18 teams, there's a fair chance they could end up on top in terms of like just defensive game style, especially in their back half. Rest of the team doesn't matter for the moment, but when you have the likes of Hardwick, Sarong, Impey, D'Ambrosio, Sicily, Weddle, McDonald, Frost, Scrimshaw, Battle, and Barras, all rotating like in and out, I expect Frost to probably be one of the ones to get pushed out.
Yeah.
But
and
then
Sarong
obviously
probably doesn't come in.
Yeah, with Sarong still being younger, still needs a little bit more experience as well.
Yeah, it'll be
and then obviously with Sicily or Hardwick, rotating forward, that does free up a defensive spot as well.
Yeah, Ambrosio, Impey, and you've even forgotten Carl Amon rotating as wingers and halfbackers. So,
and they're all players that can basically cover each other's roles as well in case of injury. So they've got some pretty solid depth now, even if it's not consistent.
You didn't forget Amon. It's on the spreadsheet.
Not in my notes though, so I did forget Amon.
Oh, it's so good.
All right, then on to my next point is the emergence of Nick Watson and Cal Shadir, both being first-year players in 2024, along with former Pie Jack Ginnivan, with winning a premiership in 2023. Really brought the Hawks small forward line to life, and with support from their current main tall in Mabior Chol, it could be very dangerous. Then obviously we have, as we've talked about just before, I'm already blanking. We were literally just talking about him. I've already forgotten. Let me scroll up.
Who's this?
Oh, Connor McDonald.
Connor McDonald. Yeah.
And like just some other players, to kind of fill in the forward line role. My one concern, and I will touch on, I may as well just touch on this just very briefly, is like injury could play a big issue if into that forward line, because the depth for the forward line isn't all that great. But well, I'll touch on that a little bit more in just a moment. And then for a point that you added, because I could not think of a third thing, I'll be honest, because like there is already too much upside to this Hawks team at the moment. But their midfield is young and emerging with Warple being only 25, Newcomb 23, Connor Nash 26, Will Day at 23. They're all leading the charge with Ambrosio, 21 on the wing, and Morrison as well, who's only 26. They're already producing great midfield stats. We might actually see growth in their clearances because their clearance stats, well, still good, isn't super elite, and that's definitely something that we could see improve as they keep gelling better.
Yeah, because they're fantastic on the ground ball, so it really just suggests it's a body issue. Well, not an issue, but it's very hard to outmuscle a solidly built 28 and 29-year-olds. So
yeah, exactly.
You just expect that to naturally develop.
You just keep trying, keep pushing, and eventually you'll grow, whether physically or at least like
weight sessions.
Yeah, exactly.
Eat those protein bars, boys.
All right, and then for my reasons for pessimism, with Mitch Lewis still signed them with injury and Jack Gunson not consistently playing every game due to age, if Chol or Deer get injured, Hawthorn's only options for key forwards are all raw, unproven talent. Again, as I just mentioned, their depth of their forward line isn't the greatest. They might have some midfield players, obviously, that can rotate through the forward line if things become dire, because Hawthorn have been really good in terms of being able to rotate and fill holes. But if bad things happen, it's not going to look very good long term, which is why
we're talking about
something like rotating Hardwick and Sicily up forward as well. Yeah.
We're talking about a two-tall forward line anyway, so the two tolls they're playing are sort of the only ones they've got, really. If we, especially because I think he's got a couple of months out, doesn't he? The
Lewis, yeah.
Lewis, yeah. So if you lose one of them, as I said, you're literally having to shuffle around forward.
The big concern being Kalshadir because he's so young. You don't want to push him too hard as a key forward.
Yeah. Because they still have like Max Ramsden, but it's a big drop off.
And then a rise in the ladder. Obviously, they finished top 8 at the end of the season. Means a tougher fixture where they can't allow an early win drought like they did with the 0-5. So they don't have any double ups against the lower rated teams like Richmond, West Coast, or North. But they face 2 upside teams in Melbourne and Adelaide as their easy teams, meaning that because these teams aren't exactly super highly rated because of where they ended up at the end of the season, means it could possibly either be a challenge for Hawthorn or it could be an easy win. And that remains to be seen, although we are about to talk about Melbourne, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's not so much, that, but when we're talking about where a couple of win-losses can be the difference between top 4 and, where they're in the middle of the pack sort of thing. When you're not having that easier second team. Because I said there's no guarantee that Melbourne or Adelaide don't improve. Hell, theoretically, Richmond could be top of the ladder by the year's end.
It's all theoretical until we see it.
All theoretical. But when you're looking at perspective, it does hurt a bit that they're facing 2 teams that, for bottom 6 teams, are pretty good. So
yeah, true. And then my last point, because you wrote this one. Hawthorn had the luxury of having to only play 34 players in 2024, which was tied second for least amount of players or most amount of players. Yeah. For least amount of players played in the league. We saw them struggle to replace key players whenever kind of big injuries happened, such as Will Day. Already playing a few fringe 22 young players on the side. They will need good injury run to stay consistent, which goes back to the point of their forward line. If there's massive injuries up there, that's a major issue. I think that midfield might be a little bit better covered. But the forward line is going to be the big one. Yeah,
because they've still got players that played, over 10 games that you probably wouldn't expect to see him at best 22. Obviously, Chung'uff Giath is sort of in limbo at the moment.
CJ was out with a major injury, to be fair.
Yeah, I know, but you know what I mean? He just didn't really seem there anyway. Finn McGuinness is another one, and Seamus Mitchell, who, struggled a bit. He played a fit in the earlier part of the season. So, as I said, we have seen that sort of depth, and there is a bit drop off there. So, not to have a go at any of the players. Obviously, they're young, and apart from Giath, who's just a bit in limbo at the moment. hopefully he comes back good and firing. But, for some of the others, yeah, as I said, there's a big drop off between their best 22 and some of the players they've got coming up.
Yeah, completely agreed. All right, now down to your ladder ranking.
Yes. So as you can imagine, I was a bit tongue in cheek. I said no doubt the pundits will hail this as our new Victorian overlords. I see some people already putting them first on the ladder. I disagree a bit with that.
I
I think they
also
are a
disagree
bit
with that.
vulnerable. Yeah, but you can't deny the overwhelmingly impressive back half of 2024. Again, if they do have the same injury luck this year as they did last year, they could break top four. But I think it will be like a bit more spread out this year. Like they'll get around the same wins and losses. But I think the good thing we'll see is they'll probably, you know, again, those runs a game, like I think they'll have a good patch somewhere. I think they'll go back and forth. Again, with some of the tougher matchups they'll have this year, they may not get that 6-win streak. But they get a lot more 2 and 3 wins in a row and just drop a random one here and there. So my predicted range is 3rd to 9th. Again, with that vulnerability, I still have a bit of collapse thing, but again, I think to get 9th, they A, would have to get injuries in the forward line, and B, see some sort of drop-off production in their midfield. And my gut feel is 5th. So, coming up, we've got the Hawthorn Hawks in that 5th spot. So there is only 2 spots in the 8 left. Should I ask, who do you think I got there, Blazy?
I figured you would. I would take a guess and say that Sydney might be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one is, who have we got left? Probably Melbourne. Actually, no, sorry. Port Adelaide would be the other one.
Yeah, so this team's missing if I don't have them in there.
I'd be shocked if you don't have Port in the top 8.
Maybe. Well, I guess the other side is they're 11th if they're not, so...
True.
We'll see.
If I'm going to think about it now, I think I think you're going to put Port Adelaide in 4th, and I think it's going to be either Sydney or Melbourne in the 7th and or 11th positions.
Yeah.
But we're about to talk about Melbourne now anyway, so I'm about to find out if I'm right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, let's...
Well, as you can see now, we've got Melbourne 2024, which is sad, Petrarca. But will they be happy, Petrarca, in 2025?
Well, considering he wanted to leave, I don't know if that's going to be the case.
I don't know. It's very up in the air with this Melbourne team. And again, with this preview, I was a bit tongue-in-cheek because a lot of it is just Petrarca's talk. But it is easy to forget, and we look at I actually separated this preview. And I know I'm being a bit, because I'm like, oh, everyone's talking about Petrarca way too much. And now I've just formatted it around Petrarca. But I just wanted to show that pre-Petrarca injury, I know they had that great fast start, but they were still 7-7. Round 13 was when he got injured against the Pie, broke his ribs, wasn't seen again. But you will have to say they were a lot better in this 7-7 run.
They were.
They had wins against the Bulldogs, emphatically beat them. Hawthorn smashed them, even though they were struggling at the time. Pretty good win against Port Adelaide. Ran away with it in the end by memory. And then obviously backing that up, 2 games away against the Crows. And then, getting wins against the Cats. And who's the other one?
St Kilda.
But yeah,
St Kilda at the time were also very, underperforming.
Yeah. But where things went wrong for them, you would have to agree, round 10 against the Eagles, they were looking great. The Eagles, I don't think, had won a game at that point.
No, I believe this was the Eagles' first win.
Yeah, and it was sort of warning signs because their midfield laid an absolute egg against them.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you remember if the first derby was in round 11? Because I think the Eagles won 2 in a row, and I'm pretty sure it was this stretch.
Yeah, I can't remember, because this is what I was saying if it was the Eagles' first win, because I can't remember if they beat the Dockers and then beat Melbourne.
Or if it was the other way
around.
around.
And then beat the Dockers.
Either way, I'm pretty sure it was 2 wins in a row. I just can't remember which order it was.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Um, but yeah, so as you can see, iffy start there. Again, also the one against the Dockers, that absolute blowout at Traeger Park, which was pretty much unheard of. Like the Dockers scoring 141 points. That just
No one,
doesn't happen all
no
that
one
too often.
expected it.
Yeah, exactly. And then, even though technically it wasn't that much difference when loss rate, it definitely was a very disappointing back half of the season after they lost Petrarca. Their wins only came from fairly lowly rated teams. I think the Bombers or the Suns were really the only two that you could argue were decent. Uh, but, as a good loss against the Lions, that was pretty close. Again, smashed by the Dockers. Oh, okay. The Giants game was close. I remember that being a bit. Oh, no, that's the Bulldogs game. That was the blowout. Okay.
Yes, it was.
And yeah, then again, blown out by the Suns to finish the season. So, to put it in summary, as I said, we saw a lot of changes happen in their midfield. There were a few teething problems. They did manage to get some success out of it. A few players had very good back half of the seasons and might show a bit of change. But as I said, it definitely, and you will see it in the stats, there definitely was a lot of vulnerability that happened to the forward half of the ground that happened not because of the loss of Petrarca, but a lot of this was amplified due to his loss, So, obviously, to start with, we all know Melbourne's offense isn't very good. They are 11.3 in terms of goals produced, which is 13th in the league. Inside 50s, 49.3, 14th in the league. So, also a lack of supply there. Their shots were 22.9 a game, which is tied 15th in the league. Their X score per shot was 3.12, which is tied 17th in the league. So not only didn't they have many shots, the shots they were having were pretty damn hard, which led them to have a pretty mediocre goals per inside 50, which was 23% at 12th in the league. And inside 50 ground ball gets, they were dead last, 11.9, 18th in the league. Tackles inside 50 was also pretty low, 10.7, 12th in the league. Offensive one-on-one contest win, 28.4, which is 4th in the league, with 8th in the league, 10.9 for offensive one-on-one contests, which, again, surprisingly didn't actually come from scores off turnover. So there were 16th in the league for scores off turnover, 40.8. So they weren't actually getting those sort of fast break offensive one-on-one options, They were just getting some value out of your players like Van Royen or who's the other tall? Harrison Petty.
Yep.
Getting those one-on-ones. But you know what I mean? Like a lot of those one-on-one concepts, when you see the expert shots, I can't guarantee it because I haven't looked at the whole. Because unfortunately, when you look at like a shot on the ground thing at the end of the year, it just looks like a bunch of dots on a map.
Yeah, it does.
But you can imagine that they have a pretty high percentage shot rate on the wing, hard ones. Obviously, defenders let you take shots wide because you tend to miss them. So marks inside 50, they weren't that high anyway. 11th, tied 14th in the league. But their mark inside 50 rate, remember they didn't have a lot of inside 50s. That was a bit better, 22.4, which is 9th in the league. So overall, pretty bad.
Yeah,
but we sort of need this coming in.
And then, we already know about their dreadful midfield, especially once Petrarca went down, and the stats definitely show that.
Yeah, well, this is the biggest surprise of the league because, again, last year and for the most part, they had very decent midfields, and I think I wrote in my written notes there was something really bad. Okay. Yeah, this is it. So the disposals pretty bad. 345.8, which is 14th in the league. Weren't that much of a disposal team anyway, but their disposal efficiency has plummeted. 70.7, which is 16th in the league. Disposal differential, a loss of 21.7, which is 15th in the league. Meters gain differential, they were a bit better, 11th in the league. But their handball efficiency, I was a bit surprised because a lot of their midfielders we know as a bit of a, rinky-dink sort of handball team. You think of Clayton Olivers, your Vineys. They were last, 78.5 at 18th in the league. And they did it's not like they were only just kicking either, because they were a more handballing team than kicking team. They kicked 61.5% of the time, which in league standard put them at 13th. Here's where it really gets bad. Turnover differential, 9.7 loss, 15th in the league. Inside 50 differential, 4.8 loss, 15th in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Clearance differential loss, 3 loss against their opponent, 16th in the league. And their mark differential, like, one of the biggest thing about Melbourne is they're normally so stingy at allowing marks, especially in their defensive half. But this obviously fell apart this year. 5.9 loss, 14th in the league. Their contested mark differential was good. Tied first in the league. I didn't actually put the number. I've got no idea why. And their marks on league were good. They had 7.8 per game, which is third in the league. But the differential dropped off a bit because they allowed just as much as they got. About 0.5 gain, which got them 7th in the league. Tackles, 58.1, which is tied 15th, lowest in the league.
Mm-hmm.
And tackle differential, though, was 1.3, 6th in the league. So, again, being a handball happy team, they didn't allow themselves to get tackled that much. But at the same time, they didn't lay that many tackles themselves. So, it was one of those things where, yeah, like for a defensive team, their midfield was just too porous and the ball was just coming the other way too much. And again, this was sort of reflected in the defense because, Melbourne, we normally associated being like number 1, number 2 top defense in the league. Even, sometimes it's raw stats, sometimes it's, the specifics. But as we can see here, you got goal against, 11.3, which is 7th in the league. You shrug your shoulders, it's not too bad. But their rebound 50 rate, 77.6, first in the league. They got the ball out of there the most times compared to any other teams. The opposition goals per inside 50, 21.1, first in the league. They didn't allow, or it was a low chance of any inside 50 being a goal. Opposition set shots per inside 50, 40.9, first in the league. This is a wasted defense. Score per inside 50, 46.2, third in the league. Opposition score from centre bounce, 7.3, first in the league. So they were, again, porous from the centre, but they were still good at defending it. So all this stuff, was just so much good to work with. And I know I'll get into where they've sort of dropped off a bit. But you look at those stats and you're thinking, you really should be edging towards one of the better defenses of the league.
Well, here's the thing: is that and this comes down to kind of like player orientation. Is that and we talked about this pretty much all through last season. Is that when Stephen May and Jake Lever were in the team together, is when they would have these incredible defensive efforts. But when one of them was out injured or suspended or whatever, which can be seen with the loss to West Coast and the loss to Fremantle, because that's when Jake Lever was out. You can see like a massive split in how their defense performed.
Yeah, and I think that sort of comes with, I think the opposition mark rate inside 50, which was the one extreme drop-off. And I know opposition score off turnovers was 48.7, which is 13th in the league. And I know you're like, oh, that can expose you. You can get the one-on-one contest. But, we're talking about a pretty big decrease because I had a look at the stats through the past year. So in 2021, they allowed 7.9 marks inside 50 per game. And that has ballooned out to, as you can see, 12.9 per game at 15th. So in the 1 year after their premiership year to now, with not that much change in personnel, they've gone from 1st to 15th. And I know that comes a lot from the midfield, but as you mentioned, there still was that bit of lack of cohesion, as you mentioned, that I think, as you said, you can kind of put that between the synergy sometimes, between when they had both players available and when they only had one player available. And as you said, like Jake Lever was probably the better at, not so much being a lockdown, but making sure he didn't get beaten as badly in those losses.
Well, from what we kind of noticed from the outside is that Jake Lever was like more of the leadership figure in that backline. It was never Stephen May. And a lot of that can come
Yes.
down to, what everyone knows about Stephen May and how hot-headed he can be. But
Yeah.
like Jake Lee will always seem to be the one that was like leading and guiding that backline for most of the
And
games.
calming down Stephen May as best as he possibly
That
can.
too.
Honestly, I think it was a bit more of a lightning rod sort of thing. Like he was the player that would get Stephen May fired up, so they would go have a go at him and not some of the younger defenders that they're sort of trialing out at this point in the match. Like your Marty Hoare or your here's the other one. I can't remember. I probably wrote in my notes, but anyway. So, as I said that. But again, it's just some other stats that were sort of middling. That again I think was sort of a bit part of the up the ground, but sort of bad in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
1-on-1 loss rate, that was actually pretty good. 24.3, tied 6 in the league. But they were forced into a lot of 1v1s. Again, a lot of turnovers, forcing that. They had 10 per match, which is 10th in the league. Defensive pressure acts, 141.16, which is 7th in the league. And opposition inside 50 ground ball gets 14.7, which is 7th in the league. So they were still pretty good on the ground as well. So all overall, like, while they did have that glaring weakness in allowing a lot of marks inside 50, overall, this defense was still really good, and I think they were just so let down by what was happening above the field, and wasted what probably should have been another top 4 defensive Melbourne performance.
Mm-hmm. I could again, as we've seen, like Melbourne can be a good team. They can be a great team, but when one specific cog or like two specific cogs either fail or are just gone, whether it's through injury, like fail like just due to performance, or like are gone due to injury or whatever, it kind of just it slows and kind of shuts down the entire team.
And I know I don't like to get too much of the like off-season drama bit or whatever, but whether it's due to off-season stuff, whether it's due to like the specific leadership, when you got players like up and down in terms of movement and all that, I definitely think there's like a lack of synergy in Melbourne. And I know a lot of people are expecting him to bounce back after this, but as much as like, you can shrug your shoulders at some of their loss. You can think they're a bit unlucky sometimes. They had a few close wins, but they just really look off the pace in some areas. And I don't think you can guarantee that they'll be any too much better next year, especially when considering they haven't really done that much in the off season as well.
Yeah, agreed. And we shall lead into that right now.
Yeah, so we'll just go through them all. They, via trade and free agency, they have brought in Harry Sharp from Brisbane. He's an outside sort of forward player. We'll talk about him in a bit. And Tom Campbell from St Kilda. And from the draft, they picked up a couple of big players, obviously finishing near bottom. They picked up Harvey Langford, pick 6, and the pick 11 they got from the Neil Bullen trade. They spent on Xavier Lindsay. They also got Aiden Johnson and Ricky Menther Jr., who's a Cat B rookie. And out, as I mentioned before, Alex Neil Bullen, big loss there. Delisted Kai Ferris-White, Josh Shackey, Joel Smith, and surprisingly Adam Tomlinson, a fairly decent key defender. He's a bit of depth there, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But also retired 3 players, 3 big in their own right. Ben Brown, pretty big loss, but he was getting a bit older. Lockie Hunter, outside player, sort of, again, heading into his twilight. I think he got an injury and just decided to call it time.
Mm-hmm.
And Angus Brayshaw, again, with the concussions, decides to put up the tower. Happened before the 2024 season anyway.
We can blame the dog that is, what's his face, for causing that one.
Brandon Maynard.
Yeah. Well, granted, to be fair, Brayshaw had a history with concussion, so it was probably going to happen sooner or later.
That
but it's just
Camel's back, but yeah,
it's just unfortunate that it happened the way that it did.
But yeah, I just want to say with that one, that's really a 2023 loss, but we'd put that on the list anyway.
Yeah, because he was still technically listed until he called it. So
yeah. But I will say, considering their problems in the midfield, like, it was just a bad loss to have. Like, you couldn't really predict it. Like, you're obviously trying to give them the most possibility to get on the field. Mm-hmm. You're willing to take the call. But just goes, like, somehow So some of those things that happen early, you don't tend to think about later in the season. But yeah, they really could have used another inside midfielder. Seeing how their forward line went, midfield went.
Yeah.
So as always, players of importance. The way I look at it, again, these players that I think could either fix a hole or have the biggest direct impact. I'm starting with Trent Rivers. Probably the biggest shining light for the back half of Melbourne's 2024 campaign. He was a rebounding defender, but put into the inside midfield. I think he played over 60% in the last 3 games. 60% CBAs, centre bounce attendance. So again, with the out of Christian Pataka and the modest return of Chris Salem, they made the move to put Rivers from a defender into the midfield for some harder body experience. And I thought he took the call right well.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people did. He even got a few Brownlow votes. And he just brought a bit of efficiency into the mix, which I think they were sorely missing. I think he was kicking at about, well, it's hard to tell because he had a lot of back half kicks, but he's still like a 60, I'm sorry, 60? 76 to 80%. For some reason, I had those two numbers, but I think it's one of them. So, again, he's still fairly young. I think he's 25, 26. So, he might need to put on a bit of bulk if, Petrarca isn't looking to be 100% fit, just so he can play that inside role a bit better. But at least now they've probably found the player that they lean towards if this sort of thing continues on in 2025.
Yeah, agreed. Speaking of Petrarca,
And yeah, well, you know me, Blazy, I don't tend to go the big name players when I look at this, but
he makes all the
considering
difference
how
sometimes.
yeah, well, there's 2 players with I think over 30% in the midfield of score involvement. One of them's Christian Petrarca, the other's Marcus Bontempelli. So Petrarca, as I said, so it's not only that, but sorry, it's over 33%, I think. Because I was looking at over the last half decade, and he is every year in the 2020s. He's been over a third of their score involvements, which is insane.
It was crazy.
Like 5 years run. Still hasn't won a he hasn't won a Brownlow yet, has he?
Correct. He has not.
Yeah.
It's between him and the Bonds that it's kind of like who's gonna get it next.
Yeah. Always a bridesmaid sort
Never
of
the
deal,
bride.
but yeah. Exactly. Another thing that they missed because of the lack of the Petrarca, I think their marking prowess. Because he was the sort of player that, he obviously rested it up forward a lot. He played as a forward when he was younger. And, he generates those this year. But even in the midfield, in that transition in your forward to inside to outside and link up, just having a player with solid hands like that. Because obviously, Oliver, I would say, like, of all the elite inside midfield, is probably one of the worst marking ones. His marks are almost all uncontested, very slight body. And the other ones, again, they just don't have the bigger bodies to replace it. So really, apart from Petrarca, they're really looking at Max Gawn for that marking prowess. So and Gawn did provide that, but they obviously want that from coming from a faster, more midfield centric player. So can't understate the importance of Christian Petrarca enough.
Agreed.
I hope he stays with Melbourne, but as I said, treat him right because things are looking a bit grim if you miss him. But obviously, it's still AFL. You can't all just be one player. And I want to put a bit of highlight on Charlie Spargo, who's a bit forgotten about. So he had a bit of a middling 2023. He came into the 2024 season, notably a bit underdone in the preseason. And unfortunately, he did his Achilles in round 1, which ruled him out for the rest of the season. But when you look at the Melbourne's forward line, a lot of their marking, with Van Ruin still developing, still comes from, I was about to say Trent Rivers again. Why am I blanking?
Which one are you going towards?
Fritsch.
Oh yeah, Bailey Fritsch. Yes.
So, if he can, Charlie Spargo, when you look at his stats, it's actually pretty good for a small forward in marking. So if he can come into this, come into the side, maybe get 15 and 20 goals put a bit of pressure off Cozzy Pickett as well for some of the ground ball work. Because, again, that was the other thing. Like, the ground ball was pretty much Cozzy Pickett or nothing. Their inside marking was pretty much Bailey Fritsch or the occasional appearance by Van Rooyen, but often he was shut down. So for a bit of consistency, I would look at someone like Charlie Spargo to hopefully have a good season. Now, again, in the more offensive side of things, I put J.K. Chandler. He's a high half forward. He can be a bit of a winger at times. He likes to roam up the ground, but I don't know if you've kept up with the injury news, but sort of I think it's a tallish, high half forward. Coltine Folstrop had a bit of game time last year, looking all right, but unfortunately injured in the preseason. So he was sort of the player that I was actually looking in putting in this. So I've changed it to Cade Chandler with that news. But I think Cade Chandler can also do the job. He is he's a lot more distribution than Colton Folstrop, so you're not looking at him to get the goals per se. But in terms of that link up, you saw, how bad some of their shots were in terms of the degree of difficulty. So if you can get a player like Chandler hitting a target up deep inside 50 or on a lead that's more reasonable, hopefully they'll be able to even get some easier shots as well, because I think that's another thing that they really need to work on. It's not just the marking, it's making sure you get enough quality marks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you're in the right position, the right angles, that sort of stuff.
Right area, exactly. And, as I said, some of it comes with leading space. Van Rooyen will get a bit better and, as they develop, but they still need distribution because, as we said, the distribution just wasn't there this year. As I said, it was very dry. So, and finally, just wrapping it up, it's not really an area that Melbourne need to worry about, the general defenders, but I will put Jake Bowie in there just because I think we forget how much, how injury affected his 2024 game was. But when you look at his progression, there's still areas that are getting better. And I think he can actually be one of Melbourne's better distributors. They'll probably look to move from Salem. He's getting a bit injury concerned. They might want to, again, put Trent Rivers in the midfield. So they'll be looking for someone to take a bit more responsibility. So that's sort of why I put Jake Bowie in there, because he's a very good user of the ball. He can get into a bit of score involvements. And I think we talked about it, Judd McPhee. If he roams up the ground, as said, he took a bit of inside midfield. He's a bit on the wing. But I think like a Judd McPhee, Jake Bowie link up might make them a lot better back half team than they were in 2024. It's a very young link up. Might not happen straight away, but for the next 2 years, I could see those two pairs having a bit of synergy in terms of Melbourne's ball movement.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's definitely going to be something that they need. Because, as we've just talked about, their forward line, it's not the greatest, and they have a lot of holes that they need to fill.
Yeah, well, as I said, when you look at the inside 50 differential, it doesn't always just come from the midfield, because as I said, high score from opposition turnovers as well. If you're turning the ball over in that forward half, I'll just have a quick... I think Melbourne were pretty mediocre at that statistic. I'm just going to have a quick check just to make sure I'm not talking absolute crap. Yeah. So they were bottom 5 in score origins from forward half. So, when you think about those turnovers, a lot coming in the forward half. As I mentioned, their ball quality wasn't that great in transition. So if they can minimize that somehow, they should be a lot better and not expose that already pretty good defense.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll get on to the new faces. Again, not too much to talk about. So I did actually mention some of the pickups because I think Melbourne are sort of in a rebuild. I haven't mentioned that before, but I genuinely look at this list and I think, Melbourne's rebuilding. They've just got some high talented players to build around.
Yeah.
So, they'll still be aiming for finals. They'll still be aiming from your 7th or 8th. But so they're playing some very fresh players. So Harry Sharp, Melbourne could use some outside talent on the wing. I've already mentioned that. I think Judd McPhee can be one of those players. And they'll work out who's the other sort of player. Harry Sharp, if they want to be a bit more offensive-minded, Jug McPhee, he's sort of a defender sort of player, so he's got that defensive attribute to him.
Mhm.
So maybe they bring Harry Sharp for a bit of experiment for the offensive bit. His ball youth sort of has to improve, but again, he is offensively minded, so if he can improve that a tiny bit, connect that midfield up, and provide a bit of space on that wing, hopefully he can improve a bit. Harvey Langford as well, mid-forward. Again, I haven't really mentioned it. I forgot to mention for Harry Sharp, but again, these two players can also be looking to fill in the role left by Alex Neil-Bullen as well, because they obviously need a bit for depth. I wouldn't pick one of these two players, but again, if they get injuries, they might play one of these ones. Harvey Langford exclusively played for a midfielder for Dandenong, but as I said, he is fairly tall, so if he plays in the forward line, again, he could be that spreader out. And as I even put on here, like, he might be a taller Neil-Bullen with less groundwork, but more marking capabilities. So, as I like to call them, the third tall, that, they're normally listed on the high half forward flank. They come up, provide a bit of marking on the wing as well if they're struggling in that area. But, it helps spread out that defense a bit more. Again, important to get that separation for... I've said his name so much and now I'm forgetting it. Van Rooyen.
Yes.
As well. So, a lot on his shoulder. I don't know if we'll see him straight away, but I think Harvey Langford probably will be seen a lot in 2023. 2025. And Xavier Lindsay, versatile mid. Apparently he's good inside and out. So this again could be another option for the wing. So he could face a bit of time in 2025 as well. Again, is known for his ball use, so if Harry Sharp seems to be too inefficient, Judd McVie seems to be too inefficient on the wing, you might see Xavier Lindsay get a few games, maybe even as a sub, get a bit of pace on the wing, a bit of quality ball use. If they are struggling, mix it up a bit. So again, I said he plays a chunk of time, but I'm seeing Xavier Lindsay as sort of a sub on type of player for 2025. So yeah.
Sounds
So,
good.
reasons for optimisms. I know we've been a bit negative, but I do actually think Melbourne has, not so much for next year, but 3 years, they can still steady the ship, so to speak. But no doubt, they lost the plot at times this year. But again, they still had showings in the back half of the year. Again, some losses against top teams that weren't too bad, but when you look at the stats, like, a lot of this was consistency, because they weren't like North Melbourne, West Coast, or whatever, where they were like constantly getting beaten by a solid margin.
Yeah.
They would just have like random games where they would have putrid, especially in that midfield stats. Like, again, the game against West Coast, both games against Fremantle, and so on and so forth. So, again, if they might get solved by Petrarca anyway. But if they can find ways to get consistency a bit in the midfield, they were edging towards it in the back end of 2024. I do actually think that they've got enough to at least get over 100%, in their percentage column. So score more than they actually concede, considering how good their defense is. And I mentioned this again, they are committing a rebuild, but I think it's actually a good time for them because, again, when you look at the players that, are sort of middling or whatever, some of them are going to retire in a couple of years anyway. So we're talking about, your Jake Melkshams, your Stephen Mays, even Jake Lever. I guess he's 29. So,
He's late
getting
20s.
a bit on with it. Like, he'll be a transition between when May retires and the next big tall defender to come in. So I reckon they've got a good time to do it because, again, they've still got the fourth highest age and the sixth most game experience, which amazes me considering some of the youngsters on the list. But, they've got, again, it's sort of like GWS. In every line, there's just enough, experience.
Yes.
To where, I won't say like stay the shit because obviously this time it didn't, but they should be able to cover up for some of the youngsters that they're playing. And like what I said earlier, like other teams playing and developing key forwards early, I think the worst of Melbourne's forward line problems is over. And I know that's a big statement considering they lost Neil Bullen. But I legitimately think that, they will play someone raw as a key forward number 3, but Petty will get to go back, playing defense instead of being a makeshift forward. We might see some of those marking stats improve. And, as I said, if Van Rooyen can just be serviceable, and again, maybe someone like a Langford plays third tall, maybe they muck around a bit, maybe Disco Turner sort of plays that, like I know Disco's not that tall, but he still marks a lot. So, if he can get that spread for them, they can play a team that they really doesn't look so makeshift. You know what I mean? Because at times they were just tossing players around, and I know it worked in their midfield at times, but their forward line, it really just didn't. Like, I know Petty was better than anyone that they were going to play, but they don't want to play Petty in the forward line.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, especially Melbourne fans, they hated that. I felt a bit sorry for him. He was, again, trying the best he could, but, I sort of feel like Tom McDonald as well. Like, Melbourne are just a bit too keen to go that makeshift forward line. That's hurt over the years, but now they're at least having that longer term plan where they are rebuilding, where they're saying, hey, we're already in the hole. Let's look to the future while we get back to solid football. So reasons for pessimism. Again, I've mentioned it. Their losses were more than just a we miss Petrarca. Some of the spankings were experienced in their midfield group were absolutely staggering and happened early in the season. So you can argue that, again, when I went through the stats, every line had a significant problem attached. And with only a few young recruits, they're really relying on natural growth and progression to ail their woes of 2024. Because, again, if they get Petrarca back, they still went 7-7 with him. I know he was a bit hurt. I know he wasn't the best. But, again, he might not be the best next year. It was a big injury to heal. He went to hospital. He's still got Clayton Oliver where we're not sort of sure where he's at. So, I think we'd like to think that those older players can get back in form, but I don't think it's guaranteed. And I think the young players is where you're going to have to see this improvement. And it might not happen. Again, Melbourne's key defenders, they are elite. Almost all of them over the age of 30 at the conclusion of the season, with Lever being 29.5 when the season commences. McDonald 33 and a bit, and May 34. So the next crop of greedy defenders will be led by Petty, who's under 100 games. I know it feels like he's been in the league for a while, but he actually hasn't. So if they aren't contending this year, you're sort of having to, again, play Howes in bigger roles. So, it's that big thing. It's like, where do you decide when you're not contending or not? And then they make the decision to cast away Tomlinson, who, although being old, was reliable depth. Is this just something where they're saying, hey, we might actually give up defense in the next couple of years just to find our next best player? So, that might just be a short-term hurt in the short run. And, as I said, if they don't, as I said, they'll have wasted, well, not say wasted, because they did win a premiership, so it is a bit harsh, but when you consider that they went out straight sets a couple of times, and you consider how bad this season was, they don't really want to follow it up with another bad season when they have a defense that can put them in the upper echelons of teams.
Yeah, agreed.
And finally, all the veteran players, I think, had very variable 2024 seasons. I mentioned it a bit before, but players like Oliver, Viney, Melksham, Langdon, Billings, Salem, and arguably May at times, we talked about that a bit before. So the youngsters in the list, as I mentioned before, need a lot of support. And when that supply isn't coming from the more experienced core group, you just need something to change. And, again, that goes back to coaching even. As I said, they had a lot of talent in that 2020 campaign. They had a lot of talent afterwards, but, this is a list where you're starting to see that thin out. You just get that. It's very hard to keep a solid list for more than 4 years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is the first year where Goodwin's going to be tested. If he is the coach to lead the rebuild, how we can get the most out of these younger players, because, he's just not getting as much from his veteran players. The only one I would say, was pretty much bang on were Jake Lever and Max Gawn.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, and not just stats prove that in terms of like the lever department, but like also with Gorn,
Mm.
like he's still their captain. He's all Australian once again. Unfortunately, pipped
Yeah.
out the player that I'm going to talk about next. Um,
We might have an argument on this episode. We might not, but I think it was deserved.
we know where each other stand.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there's they're probably the two major players that still stepped up and performed as they always do, like in this
Yeah.
season, despite everything else going on around them.
Yeah, and even when I said about leadership, it's like when there was a problem with Mark's in defensive 50, we saw Gorn go down there and take more responsibility as a defending intercept ruckman, and lift that part of his game, which we just didn't see. Like, we saw at times Viney could get a few games going, but he couldn't really lead that midfield group. Oliver, so much said without him, we won't talk about. Malcolm's obviously fading out of the side anyway. Langdon, again, with that variability on the outside, I really can't say that, he's as good as he was a few years ago. And then Salem's obviously injured, and Billings is just Billings, really.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I completely agree. And yeah, you're probably right in that the leadership side of things probably needs some sort of adjustment. Whether I think Max Gorn is still probably the right captain for them.
Oh yeah.
But whether it's like, coaching staff might need a bigger shake up, that sort of thing. Well, considering they did just
Yeah.
lose a an assistant coach to West Coast, that's that the newer assistant coach that they might have brought in could be all the difference.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I gotta give a little check if they've called their leadership group. No, they haven't yet. So honestly, I'd like to see a player that's a bit younger, like maybe if he's got that right profile. Trent Rivers being added in that leadership group, who did show a lot of grit. Maybe you start priming a player like McVee or I don't know about like Caleb Windsor because I haven't talked about him, but he also had a pretty decent first year season. So again, like start integrating some of the older leadership captaincy with the younger players as well.
Yeah, I agree.
So we've just got through this jumbled mess of a team. Where do we think this is all going to end up? Because honestly, looking at my predicted range, I probably could extend that a bit further.
You definitely could
to be
extend that
honest.
a bit further. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah. So Melbourne, again, like Collingwood, one of the hardest sides to predict, with defense being the only thing in the side being elite, as we mentioned before. But again, on the flip side, we could be, I know it's pretty harsh to say about St Kilda, but sort of devolving into a St Kilda-esque side where really they only have like their back half that's, really good. And even then, St Kilda scored a lot from the back half. Melbourne didn't as much. So the Finns, their list is a bit thin, so injury will increase in variability. I've put my predicted range as 7th to 13th. Honestly, 14th and 15th is probably on the cards. I didn't like making them too big, but I guess that's only 5. You know what? I'm just going to make an edit now.
Just do it now because we both agree that they could fall a little bit further.
Yeah, I don't think they'll be bottom 4, but 14th is pretty fair. But yeah, my gut feels 11th. I just feel like it's a bit too much to patch up in one season. I think they'll take a couple of seasons to get it back. But yeah, it's just honestly, what's the damage going to be? Because, we've said a lot about some of the off-field drama, either coaching or player movement. For Melbourne, it's all about adding some stability while they work out what they're going to do in the future. And again, they could make finals.
On this slide, did you accidentally put Freo and Hawthorn in the wrong positions? Because I think you might have. Yeah, you put Hawthorn in 5th at one point, but they're 7th on here.
Yes, it looks like I did. Yeah, because it's fixed in the next slide. Yeah, I think I did. Oh, that's right. All right.
Hey, at least I recognized it.
Quickly.
No, Hawthorn at 5th, Freo at 6th.
Oh, I've just moved everyone down a spot.
Yes, that's you
did. Okay.
At least one of us.
That later. That doesn't matter now.
No. Well, we know where they. We know where they sit.
It's on the literal next one, so yeah.
We know where they sit. That's fine.
Yeah, Melbourne. I've put them at 11th. I don't know how you feel, but there's just that. There's that element of mystery to them. but it's a bad mystery. Like, when you get like a foul smell and you wonder if you stepped on dog poo or not. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, you've got some inklings that, things might be fine, but ability in their game, and it's really concerning to me.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
completely agree. But hey, at least I know I was correct with where you were going to put them.
Yeah, well, yeah, as I said, not surprisingly, I don't think, as I said, 14th or 12th, you know, I definitely have them against the Suns, just purely because of like that structural thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's insane this season because again, like Melbourne theoretically should have a top defense, but again, I don't think we're going to be seeing as many like top defenses favored in this season, as much as last. I don't know, maybe the last couple of decades have, provided where teams like Hawthorn, even Geelong with their defense, where teams can build dynasties off defense. Um, I think, we're heading into a more offensive minded, at least for years. And I think that definitely goes against the favor of the Melbourne Demons when I'm making this gut feel.
Yeah, 100%. All right, shall we move on to our last team of the session?
Yes, and you've got this one. It is the North Melbourne Kangaroos.
Indeed, I do, and I really like how you've displayed this because it's very accurate.
Yeah, pretty much. Fantastic
The
women's
men's are like,
performance,
"Woe
and
is me! Why are we bad?" And the women's are like, "Yeah, we're great."
life's good. Exactly, exactly. I
Well,
always try and make these
we definitely
good.
had fun talking about how the women's team performed towards the end of 2024. But let's talk about how bad the men's were because it was not a pretty sight. So it
Yeah.
was just like any other year for the struggling Roos, and by that I mean the past like 20 years, give or take. With only 3 wins coming from the second half of the season. By their round 2 clash against Fremantle, North lost all of their first half games by over 35 points. I believe against Freo it was like 26 or something like that, 29.
26, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. It wasn't until round 13 that they would finally record a win, a 9-point victory over the Eagles in Perth, which is not even then not a pretty sight. Like that should have been a
No. It was
bigger
a
margin.
comeback. It was a lot of turnovers.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
from there we did start to see some positive signs, even if they didn't result in wins for North. Round 14 and 15, they lost by 1 and 3 points to Collingwood and Melbourne, respectively, having just run out of legs against Collingwood because Collingwood had that massive fight back in the fourth quarter, and time beating them against Melbourne. They were very much the better side in the fourth quarter against Melbourne, but Melbourne just pipped them at the end. The next win will come against the Suns, who were still struggling to win away from home. But their final win of the season would be recorded against Richmond, a team still dealing with major horror injuries, and it would also end up being Dustin Martin's final game. Their round 22 game against West Coast in Hobart would be their last close game of the season, being a 5-point loss down to the wire. We all kind of remember watching the last quarter of that and how kind of insane it was. And then, yeah, North just having run out of legs. So then obviously their big losses still pretty much across the board with a 124-point loss against Hawthorn.
Yeah, and I think the message of that is after the Suns win, they have a bit of momentum, looking to maybe have turned the corner, and then to just like fall off a cliff again was very disappointing. Even if they did show good signs in that period of time.
Yeah, like we know they have some good players. Obviously, they have massive like top 10 draft picks in that team. Some pretty solid father son picks, which I will talk about soon. But yes, we're still looking for that cohesion, that kind of step up into better progression, which the stats will definitely kind of show.
Yeah, well, this is where I have to come in and be a bit of a grumpy goose because, as much as we rave on about the talent of North Melbourne, it's still not being anywhere close to represented on the score sheet or stats. So, offensive stats, and I'll try and go through these quickly because they aren't that great. Goals, 10.6, 16th in the league. Shots, 18.8, 18th in the league. Inside 50s, 45.3, 18th in the league. So overall, they're not getting the ball inside 50 and they're not going to get any goals from them. They did get a lot of accurate shots, so a lot of these shots sort of came from just edging out the few good goals you'll get per season. Marks you'll just get in any given game. But when you couple that with the marks inside 50 and the mark inside 50 rate, being 9.7 and 21.4 respectively, you're sort of saying, okay, they're just getting the easy marks when they eventually get a win, but otherwise they're just losing most competitions, as demonstrated by their awful offensive one-on-one win percentage, which is 22.8, 17th in the league, and the offensive one-on-ones tied 13th at 10.1. So where this does seem to look a bit better is a goals per inside 50. So if you average it with, taking away the awfulness of the amount of it when inside 50, they're 23.4, which is 11th in the league, which is at least something. But again, they still need more because, again, even if the ball gets to ground, because, again, we talked about they didn't get much marks, so the ball obviously went to ground a bit more. Tackles inside 50, 8.4, 18th in the league. Inside 50 ground ball gets 12.9, 16th in the league. And, of course, the opposition rebound rate, 17.9, which is 9th in the league. So I was a bit surprised that they weren't first. Like with all these stats, you think it's like easy to get the ball out against them. But obviously, they were able to get a bit of score and a few goals. But again, if it wasn't like the easy set shots, it was really just getting blazed away.
Yeah, I think so.
So again, pretty dismal, but as we'll mention, supply is also an issue. And, maybe they took Scarface to heart too much because they are definitely no risk of getting high off their own supply. Because disposals, they are 11th, 330, 53.3rd in the league. Disposal differential, it's a 2.4 loss at 12th in the league. And I will say this, compared to other years, it's a bit unsure whether this is good or not, because you could say, oh, they're getting a few more disposals. But, this isn't a team that's like 18th in disposals, but they're not getting it inside 50. So a lot of these, you're seeing LDU get stats, you're seeing Sheasel get stats, you're seeing all these players get stats, but it's not resulting in anything.
Yeah.
And it's almost, as damning that, like the disposal differential, you're going to see 20 more disposal loss in teams like West Coast and Richmond, and yet North are worse at getting the ball inside 50. And, center clearance, 12.7, which is 4th in the league. Differential, though, 0.5, which is a loss of 11th. So, obviously, when you're giving up a lot of goals, you're going to get more ball ups. So, they are winning the clearances, and they are getting good stats from that. But when you look at the differential, again, I'm not going to be too harsh on that because, again, these are bodies that are building. So, I'm not concerned about that too much. That'll get better. What I'm really a bit concerned about is how chippy some of their movement is. So we'll look at meters per disposals, 15.5, tied 18th in the league. Meters gain differential, 450.5 against loss. Sorry, I should say. So that's 16th in the league. Intercept differential, 8 loss. So teams average 8 intercepts more than they get, which is 18th in the league. Inside 50 differential, 13.8 more inside 50s on average by opponents, which is insane to me.
That is ridiculous.
18th in the league. Turnover differential, 8.2 more turnovers. So about the same as intercepts. 18th in the league. Ground ball differential, 4.8 loss, 17th in the league. Loose ball get differential, 4 loss, 18th in the league. Mark on lead, 2.1 loss, 16th in the league. So this is a team that doesn't move the ball by kicking a lot. They don't move the ball very far. And when they do, it's getting turned over and just sent back against their poor, struggling defense. So, again, it was actually pretty funny. And, it's sort of the way that I think that midfields get reported on, because there was someone that gave their list of where they ranked the best midfield in the comps. And, it was just a throwaway article. Like, I had some disagreements. Some I thought was okay. But then they had the user list. And it put North Melbourne as the number 1 midfield. Which, I just thought was pretty funny. Because when you say like, oh, she's all LDU,
Wardlaw.
Wardlaw, even some of the developing players like Phillips, like Powell,
Mm-hmm.
they're not terrible names, but A, they're so young, and B, they're just so used to getting beaten. And also, another thing I'd like to mention, every year we're all about, oh, why are there never wingers in the All-Australian? Oh, wingers are so underrated. And, when you look at the drop-off between North's inside and outside movement, like, their outside so bad. Like, we saw Stevenson really struggle. We saw Dylan Stevens, their recruit, really lay an egg in his first year. So they didn't have anything on the outside either. So it's not, you can't just put all the blame on the inside midfield. It was really just structurally one of statistically the worst midfield in the league, despite, because I'm not saying don't be optimistic about them. I'm not saying that all of them are overrated and hacks, but you've got to take the age profile when we're talking about next season development.
Yeah.
And don't think that's going to improve next year.
Agreed.
Because it's just too much to get. There's, again, the disposal differential. Great to see that improvement. You hope to see some of those go from 18th to like a 12th or a 13th.
You want them to jump to like middle of the pack. You don't expect them to go super high, but you don't want them to be super low.
They're not just going to jump from, they're all not all going to develop in one go and just suddenly be a great midfield. Anyway, talking about defense, not helped out at all. Such a young list, so vulnerable. Not surprisingly, goals against 16.3, 18th in the league. Opposition score point is per inside 50, 53.3, 18th in the league. So not only are they allowing the most inside 50s, it's very easy to score from those inside 50s. They also gave up a lot of set shots, not so surprising. They had a lot of mediocre key defenders.
Mm-hmm.
They allow 50% of any inside 50 to result in a set shot, 18th in the league. They allow 27.5 any inside 50 to be a goal, which is 17th in the league. The opposition mark rate inside 50, 25.5, which is 16th in the league. So pretty high success rate for opposition marks. Opposition tackle inside 50. There's a lot of tackles inside 50 against them. 12.6, 15th in the league. Opposition score origins. They're all last. So that's from turnover. That's from I think that's back half, forward half, center clearance. They're all last in. I'll quickly check that. Oops. Need to put opposition average. Yep, last. Okay. But coast to coast special team, at least they're defending from opposition kick-ins. 2.7, which is second in the league. A meaningless stat because obviously they don't score enough behinds because they don't have enough shots and they were pretty accurate anyway. But they were still second, so they get a little green thing on them.
To be fair, a lot of their forward accuracy does come from Nick Larkey, who I will talk about pretty soon.
Oh yeah, but I'm just saying, like, it's not really a defensive stat. Like,
no,
I'm just putting it there for some joy. And opposition grab ball gets per inside 50. Opposition grab ball gets inside 50, 19.2, first in the league. That should say 18th in the league.
They wish they were first in the league for that.
Yeah, exactly. It was the most. That were the best at allowing the most. Sorry to be the bearer of any Kangaroos fans, but
I don't think anyone is really surprised at the look of this.
No, I think the disappointing thing is they're still in that group that's almost separated from most semi-decent teams. Like, they wanted that improvement this year. Under Clarkson, they were saying, oh, we just need to see improvement. But really, they haven't. They may have found players, they may have found positions, but overall, they just haven't.
Some of the players that they have found individual improvement. But in terms of team improvement, it just hasn't come along yet.
Exactly.
All right, speaking of players, there were a ton of list changes, as kind of expected. So we'll start with the trades and free agency. being Luke Parker, one of the big ones, because no one kind of really expected him to leave Sydney. Everyone thought he was going to be a one-club player. But no, he has left Sydney via a trade, has come to North Melbourne. Jack Darling as well. Everyone kind of had an inkling that Darling wanted to get out of West Coast, but we weren't sure where he was going to go. But he has come over to North Melbourne. Why do you have Luke Parker twice? That's my question. Caleb Daniel is the one
meant to be
that
Caleb
you missed.
Daniel.
He's a trade from the Bulldogs. He was kind of getting pushed out of their best 22, both due to performance and just due to some other stuff at the same time. Just EB.
Does he have an I in his
No,
name?
it's EB.
Okay. It is just EB.
And then Jacob Constanti, who has not played an AFL game as of yet. I do talk about that when I just go over them individually. But he followed Luke Parker from Sydney and has now landed at North Melbourne. Their draft picks are number 2 draft pick Finn O'Sullivan, pick 27 Matt Whitlock, Luke Urquhart at pick 57, and River Stevens, son of Cooper Stevens? No.
No. I was the brother of. No.
I can't remember the first
Was
name.
he related? I think. Yeah. Jack Stephen? No. I can't remember either.
I can't remember anyway.
I'll just look him up.
But he's the third.
He's
I think the third father-son draft pick that the club currently has, and we'll actually talk about that shortly. But they picked him up at pick 67. Seeing if you found it. That's why I've stopped.
No. Also, I may have put him in wrong. Wait, what?
No, that's correct.
Stephens.
No, that's correct.
Can't even find him. Okay.
It's fine.
Found his draft profile.
I don't know if it has who his father is on there, but anyway.
Okay, apparently there's a Cooper Stevens that plays. Something's weird here, but I've picked Cooper Stevens. It's meant to be River Stevens. Okay.
Silly.
Yeah. Premiership skipper Anthony Stevens.
There we go.
There we go.
I knew there was a Cooper Stevens in the AFL. I couldn't remember if it was dad's name or not. But no, it's a current player. But yes. So he's River Stevens being the third father-son prospect that North currently have. I will talk about the rest in a moment. But delisted players that have gone out are Blake Drury, Hamish Free, Charlie Lazaro, Biggie Nguyen, former Richmond player, which I'm kind of sad about because he did have a lot of upside. He just never got enough opportunity. Tyler Sellers and Curtis Taylor. Retired Liam Shields, Jaden Stevenson, which was the big one. He was a big Collingwood prospect. Had kind of got shoved out due to the salary cap issues, and it's kind of over time lost kind of a love for the game. And then Hugh Greenwood retired just I think because it was that time. He was Twilight years, was a solid player, but never got to the peaks that he was hoping for. And then being indefinitely suspended and should never touch the AFL ever again is Taron Thomas. We don't have to say much more on that. That's kind of an obvious thing. Moving on to our important players. How in depth do you want me to go with this first one?
You can have a little talk about it. Because I do have a point about Tristan Cherry to counterpoint, so you better say the good things about him.
Well,
and honestly, it's nitpicking as well.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, as you all know, if you've listened to any of the podcasts during the second half of the season last year, I am a big Tristan Cherry fan. I thought he was doing amazing things as North Melbourne sole ruck. He put in the hard work going in replacing the All-Australian squad of 44. Got pipped out by Max Gawn, getting into the best 22, 23, whichever it is, I can't remember now. He also got second in North's Sid Barker medal. He averaged 17.9 disposals, 6.6 clearances, 34.5 hitouts, and 8.7 hitouts to advantage in 2024.
Yeah, and I will say, I'm a big Tristan Cherry fan too, but I think just the only drawback against him is he does, and this is where I think he will improve, because I think he's got a lot of room for improvement, but especially as his body gets bigger, as he gets used to these matchups, is that first possession after he gets the hit out, especially the, what do you call them, like ruck hardball gets or whatever it is, where you just grab it out.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So a lot of those got dumped forward. So they're going to have to find some better disposal from their midfield unit. So if Tristan Cherry, who's already a fantastic tap, can link up a bit better, he'll be, again, absolutely confirmed for All-Australian, because it's already so good offensively in a pretty offensively inept team.
Yeah, absolutely. He
And
just
as I said,
needs slightly better efficiency.
and he is allowing those players like Luke Davies-Uniacke, George Wardlaw to get statistics, because I think they do need help being younger bodies. And that's why I think you have seen, that, in fact, I think that's also why you have seen like improvements in possession numbers, in territory, but not so much in meters gained, because again, unfortunately, they're not used to winning the ball as much. So now that they've experienced the ball, you hope that they'll use it a bit better. So this sort of applies for all these players, but these players, I think the room for growth is a lot with disposal efficiency, and it is a nitpick for Cherry, but I think you'll see him as one of the premier ruckmen if he learns how to do that for the next decade.
Absolutely. Next on the list is LDU, Luke Davies-Uniacke. Having just been announced that North have tabled a 7-year deal to keep him, which remains to be seen whether he will accept that or not. It's safe to say that he is very important to their future plans. He won the Sid Barker medal last year. He started in the midfield in 2024. Despite the midfield results, he was kind of like their big star player for the most part because he played most of the season. He averaged 27.7 disposals, 3.9 tackles, and 6.3 clearances in 2024.
Yeah, exactly. And, as I said, especially when they're lost Torn Francis, and I know I'm the sort of villain here in this story, but, to have a player like Davies-Uniacke, be a bit flirty, I think you do table him for 7. Again, there's areas of his game I think he can improve, and I'm not actually sold he's going to be like the elite among elite in terms of midfielders, but he is progressing quite well. It's just whether I just think you lock him in for consistency and hope that as the midfield gets older, you see a lot of his disposals start to getting a bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. And like they have a core midfield, like a really solid core midfield, being LDU, Sheezel if he plays mid,
Yeah.
Wardlaw, and Jai Simpkin as well. Like that's a really solid core to build around. Plus Sherry, obviously in the ruck. It was just about
it's just
that growth
like
and experience.
it drops off. It's, as I said before, it drops off big because, as I said, you got like Tom Powell, Will Phillips. Who's the other one that's a bit
There's a couple.
Yeah, Bailey Scott. That's what I'm thinking of. So again, it's all about not only getting that, but also getting enough flows around you. Because as I said, it can't just be them winning the ball all the time. Because
exactly.
They need to link up with their outside midfield, which they just haven't been able to do. And it's been talent on there. So again, it's not just on these players, because I'm sounding very harsh, but I actually have a lot of faith in at least most all of them to be above average players. I just don't think in this landscape you win it all from the midfield.
Yeah, correct. And then obviously Nick Larkey, known affectionately as Suv. Nick Larkey's past 2 years have been nothing short of amazing for a key forward, having kicked 73 goals in 2023 and 46 goals in 2024. Obviously, we know why. That's sort of a lesser output in 2024. But he averaged 9.5 disposals, 2 goals, 67.6% goal accuracy, which is where a lot of their accuracy comes from in the first place, and 4.3 marks in 2024.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think he had that bad of a drop off 2023 to 2024.
It's just everyone around him.
So little. Yeah, exactly. Especially when he was playing, essentially, because they experiment so much as Zerha. Sometimes he was the second forward with him. Sometimes he was in there, or even that switch. He actually first played near dear to your heart. Cullen Coleman-Jones, gets injured. Wait, no, sorry.
Yes, he does. He was injured in the preseason, and he plays with a ruck forward. So
yeah. Okay. He does play for North.
Yes, he does.
Richmond to North.
Okay, Richmond to North, correct.
And also the move of Charlie Comben into the back line. As I said, he had everything disappear from him, and he still managed 46 goals in 2024. So, with all that, no supply and all the best defenders on him.
Yeah,
it was a lot to ask.
Absolutely. And
And he
then,
still had that streak of a goal per game that was broken. Like, it was
well,
pretty late in the year
he had
that did break.
in 2024 he still had an average of 2 goals per game, give or take. So he
Yeah,
was still
exactly.
had a decent output regardless.
Yeah.
All right, and
Anyway.
then Harry Sheezel is my next one. I for the last three, I'm kind of have to talk about the big ones, the big old draft picks. The former number three draft pick, Sheezel showed no signs of slowing down in competing in the 2024 season. His shifting roles from halfback to the midfield elevated his play style, earning him third in the Sid Barker Medal, as well as the Roos Best Clubman, the AFL, I think it's Coaches Association's Best Young Player, and All
Yeah.
Australian selection. He averaged 29.8 disposals, 6.3 marks, 3.8 tackles, and 421.6 meters gained in 2024.
And I think obviously the biggest thing about Sheezel is that his disposal's good. I know he's playing off the halfback. It's a lot easier to rack up those sort of disposals. But I think that's why people want to see him in the midfield, because they need an injection of class in there. And Harry Sheezel's obviously the biggest ear tag to provide that for them.
Well, yeah, it's either him or our next player in George Hawthorn, who will unfortunately not be playing for first couple of rounds in 2025 due to an injury. But the number four draft picks efforts in 2024 were competitive, driven, and is the type of grunt that North need in their midfield. It's just unfortunate, he's injured, so it doesn't help him right now. But he averaged 19.1 disposals, 4.3 tackles, and 4.8 total clearances across 18 games last year.
Yeah, exactly. And, a part of it was a bit concerning how much of the clearance game was actually, just Wardlaw and Davey Zieniak. But he is good to at least have that base there, especially going into next season. They'll just need to find players that rotate in. And unfortunately, George Wardlaw out is a shame, but at least they can look into where that third midfielder in that rotation could possibly be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now we move on to the new faces, and it's all the veteran talent apart from Constanti that they picked up. So Caleb Daniel, known as the second smallest player in the league, thank you for that correction.
Yeah.
Has a reputation for his elite.
Nick Watson.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense actually. But yeah, it has a reputation for his elite kicking accuracy. Caleb Daniel was pushed out of the Bulldogs' best 22, decided to look for a new home, and the Roos were happy to take him. He will be utilised for his ball-winning skill and speed. He averaged, in the games that he did play for the Doggies last season, he averaged 14 disposals, 2.8 marks, and 1.5 total clearances across 16 games. It's not a great stat, but if you look at the stats overall in his career, it is fairly good. He just, didn't get to really showcase enough with the Dogs last season.
And I think he was sub a few times as well for a period. I think he had 4 games or something. Yeah, so that brought it down a bit as well.
Which
I actually disagree. I don't know if he is, unless there's injury, I don't know if he's going to slot right into their best 22. Unless he plays wing.
Fair chance he'll play wing, because they definitely need a decent wingman the most. And he's got good run.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, it just seems like North are just slotting weird players into the wing and hoping it comes off. But
it's either you play him in the wing or you turn him into a small forward.
Maybe. He has played there. But he's versatile. And I do think in terms of providing experience and knowledge to players like Colby McKercher, again, I'd have him ahead of him at this point. Obviously, Sheezel himself. And there's another one too, but Zach Fisher.
Yes.
Zach Fisher. So, as I said, unless they're really looking to try something. But I think the good thing is, they have that, so again, with North injury North being still a very thin list, having Caleb Daniels in the wing. I don't know if he plays 16 games for North, but there's a possibility he plays, at least over 10.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next on the list is Luke Parker. After 293 games, Sydney's former co-captain wanted a new change of scenery, where his veteran talents and leadership could be utilised on a grander scale. And, what better to be amongst one of the youngest teams in the competition with, such burgeoning young talent that need to be better leaded on field. Despite only playing 10 games last season, he averaged 14.1 disposals, 3.2 marks, and 2.5 total clearances in 2024.
Yeah, so I think the two biggest things about this is around the ground clearances, looking to lift up, especially in that forward half. And their ground ball forward work, they need someone like Luke Parker, who is a genius at ground level,
Yeah.
to be passing on some of that to, I mean, not only providing of his own, because he's still got a lot to give, but passing on to that to players like, what's his name? I always get mixed up Curtis Taylor, or the one that didn't get delisted and has Taylor in his name.
That is a good question.
I think it's Curtis Taylor.
Curtis Taylor
Eddie
was
Ford is
Eddie
another
Ford,
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taylor Curtis?
Something. Paul
No.
Curtis?
Paul Curtis! We got there. Anyway.
Look, forgive
again,
us. North
players...
don't exactly have like a massive recognizable list.
Oh, I like whoever Paul Curtis. He just, didn't get much of it. And he needs to improve his ground game. Hopefully Luke Parker can transfer that to him. But again, he's still pretty young.
Yeah.
But yeah, great pickup. Probably the most impactful player I'll say on this list.
Yeah.
But the next one will provide a lot of support on the player that I said was very unsupported in 2024.
Absolutely. Jack Darling, a veteran key forward. Whilst Jack Darling's best is behind him, his veteran leadership and on-field experience across 298 games at the Eagles will be what Clarko will utilise up forward. In 2024, he averaged 10 disposals, 1 goal, 56.4% goal accuracy, 3.2 marks, and 2.9 tackles across 21 games. Obviously, we know those stats are pretty low for the fact that the Eagles are not very good and barely got the ball up forward at times. And then when they did, that mostly went to Oscar Allen or Jake Waterman, especially Jake Waterman during that sort of middle period where the Eagles were like decent. But yeah, so that's why Darling's stats are a little bit low despite playing so many games. But, we know his veteran presence and solid leadership will definitely help grow the forward line that's kind of burgeoning up there alongside Clarkey.
Yeah, and along with Luke Parker, I think that's sort of the design for these pickups is Jack Darling, very underrated, and you've put 2.9 tackles per game as a pressure player. Like, I imagine I think he's above average for key defenders in terms of pressure acts. Is pretty much up there.
His past couple of years, when he hasn't been injured, have been really good in terms of forward pressure.
Yeah, and honestly, he gets a bit of a hard knock. As I said, it's just one of those awkward players that's like his best role is second defender, which never really, because as I said, like, number one defender gets involved in all the deep scoring shots. Third defender goes up, distributes a lot. And then you get that awkward second defender that sometimes plays decoy, gets a bit of, doesn't always get involved, but can be just as important in providing structure and pressure. And I think Jack Darling should hopefully bring that to North, who had pretty much no structure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing that I find about this, especially these two pickups, is both of them are going to play their 300th game with North, where you would think they would have played
No one would have predicted that.
Yeah, no one would have seen that coming, that they wouldn't play their 300 games with the clubs that they started with.
Well, fingers crossed. We're hoping no injuries. So.
Well, hoping no injuries that completely wipe them out of their careers.
Yeah.
Well, Jack Darling, hopefully not. He's only got 2 more games to go, and Parker only has 7.
Yeah.
So it should be both in the first half of the year, provided no major injuries.
Parker, he's not actually that old, is he? Like, Parker's like 31.
Yeah, he's like 31.
Or am I dreaming?
I mean, he's like 31, 32, I'm pretty sure.
32.
Yeah.
32 in 3 months.
And like Jack Darling's around the similar age off the top of my head. I think they started maybe a year apart.
Darling's...
I can't remember.
I think Darling's 33, 34. But yeah, I guess that's not too far.
No.
In terms of key forward age, it's 32.7.
0.7.
0.7.
So his birthday's in like
months.
June, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I honestly thought it was a bit older, but yeah, you're right.
But yeah, so they'll get if they stay in like decent shape, they'll get at least 2 years out of them, which is good. Like it's really helpful for.
I think Parker
leadership.
Parker 3 to 4, Darling 2. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. And then Jacob Constanti, originally from country Victoria. Constanti followed Luke Parker in the move from North Melbourne from Sydney. I think that was mostly a pick trade to get Constanti to the North. It wasn't anything major. He hasn't played an official AFL match yet, but is a medium forward looking to kind of flourish and grow. Alongside, I know I have it in my notes alongside Sheezel Hawthorn and LDU, but he's also going to grow with Nick Larkey. He'll definitely get a lot of help from Jack Darling and Luke Parker as well. And yeah, just hopefully kind of flourish and get some decent game time in him.
I think I'm not sure if he 100% meant this, but like you might not see him straight away,
Oh
but
no,
like
of
in a
course
couple
not.
of years, you know, well, he might get a few more opportunities due to injury and all that. But you know, when Jack Darling passes the torch, so to speak, they're going to be looking at Jacob Costanzi because obviously coming from Sydney, he was always going to be second fiddle to all their sort of tall players,
Yeah,
like Amadi, Logan, McDonald. Um, so as I said, it's still a project player. I think it's still 2021.
he
They
is.
gave up on him fairly early. But on the flip side, even though he didn't get given up by much, I would still definitely ear tag this kid as 3 or 4 years. Like he might come into when North Melbourne look a bit better, and it might advance them when they're hopefully coming up the ladder.
Hopefully. All right. Reasons for optimism. I'll be honest. This did took a little bit of thinking to try and find some good signs, but I found some good signs, and I'm pretty happy with what I found. So the injection of veteran talent, veteran proven talent, gives North better on-field leadership capabilities. On top of their current captain in Jai Simpkin, who I think is a great captain for them. He's young, so he's gonna like grow and experience and learn more with the young talent around him as well. Luke Parker was a massive leadership component during his career at the Swans and will be utilized for those skills on field. Remember, Luke Parker has played a ton of final series, a few grand finals to boot, so he has all of that experience. And obviously, being a former co-captain as well, alongside Callum Mills, he's going to be able to use those talents to, as we talked before, just help grow this very young team around him.
Yeah, because I was like, Jessica struggled early, and I know it was a bit highlighted how disappointing it was, but he did turn it around, and I think that's great as a young captain to, when things aren't going against you, to still at least bring something to the table, improve at least your own season, have that period where they did win a couple and were close. So now he's not on an island; he's got some players around him, and hopefully that will transition into better leadership for them.
It's his kind of growth is very much shades of Trent Cotchin when Cotchin first got the captaincy because he was a very young captain when it was passed over. So and
Exactly.
That sort of growth in a young team is definitely going to help him as well as the players around him.
They didn't have like it was pretty much Connington was gone when he got captaincy. So it's not just you lose your captain; it's you lose the person that was captain as well. So there's not as much transition.
Yeah,
It'll be a bit hard.
Yeah, just a little bit. My next point is with Callum Coleman-Jones returning from an Achilles injury he did in early 2024, Sherry and Larkey will finally get that extra tall assistance they were sorely missing. Having only played 31 games across 7 seasons in the AFL, CCJ wants to finally get his breakout season and prove his worthiness as a tall. Apart from the attitude that he kind of had during the pandemic years, which is why he got sent to North in the first place.
Yeah.
I think he's actually been a fairly decent player. He just needs to hopefully get a good run at it. And yeah, that Achilles really took him out because I think he would have been a massive, maybe not a massive difference maker, but would have been an important like sort of component
for structure
in
definitely.
2024.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was unlucky that he did his Achilles and got completely wiped out. But hopefully 2025 will bring some better news. And then my last point isn't really about the season specifically, but it's more about legacy with North because we know North have had some incredible talent over the years. Boomer Harvey, Glenn Archer, and obviously Anthony Stevens, as we mentioned before. But now they have Jackson Archer, Cooper Harvey, and River Stevens. So at least we know that legacies look hopefully bright to carry on at Arden Street.
Yeah, because again, you don't want to think too much about ownership and money and all that. But when you're not going well, you need something small like that to like get fans buzzing a bit. And it is a good time for some of these players to come in because obviously you don't specifically plan it.
And whilst I
at least I don't know.
And whilst I didn't really highlight him in like statistics or like an important player to watch, I think Jackson Archer is a really solid player and definitely has a ton of upside. Because I went to the game that was Dusty's final game against North, and I just watched. I didn't really watch us play. I watched Jackson Archer play, and he is really good.
Yeah,
he just needs to get that better upside.
I'd say he plays above his body. Statistically, it's not that great, but he's doing. Like he nullifies a lot of contests, and yeah, sure, that doesn't get you as good as stats if you're like winning it.
Mm.
But at the same time, for his body, his size, and this early in his career to be nullifying those contests, some of those tend to wins, some of those tend to rebounds. You're starting to look into like a upper echelon player. So
Yeah.
he's got the DNA for it. He's got the player structure for it, and hopefully, along with the other teams, as I said, it might be a bit of connection to get some excitement back into North.
Hopefully. And then our reasons for pessimism, which I will be honest, Psyrick wrote all three of these. There's just much of the fact that it should have been very obvious to find a lot of pessimism in North. I was really struggling because I like to look at the more optimistic side of North because I know that
Yeah, sometimes
they can swing
yeah.
up. It's just North.
Yeah, I'm just a jerk because Blaze is a bit too nice. It's like you look at these bum teams, you think reasons why they should get
Oh
better.
no,
Everyone likes a better story.
I can be a bit of an arsehole. Like, we know that I'm not a fan of a couple of players on certain teams. We know that I don't like Essendon all that much. Collingwood all
Yeah.
that much, But that part of that's in the blood.
It does feel like punching down, but me, I've got no shame, so I will gladly write 3 reasons why North Melbourne should be pessimistic,
and
it should come with them.
I will run through them. So there is no guarantee that anything
okay,
North
cool.
has changed in the offseason will be enough to lift them out of the bottom 4. And the overall concern is that the acquisition of... Actually, I wrote this first one. I remembered.
Oh, yeah.
I did write the first one, at least. And the acquisition of veteran talent would be more of a hindrance than a benefit. Again, part of that could just be due to injury as well. Not enough. They won't play enough games to really have that on-field leadership. Sort of stuff.
Honestly, I think that's like more the media side of things as well. Because again, you bring in some of these players, and I think you get expectations a bit too high.
Yeah.
Because they will bring good things, but it's still going to be other players that are going to have to lift.
Yeah, 100%. Because there's no guarantee that they will have that massive on-field impact that at least the media is expecting them to.
So, as I said, it's not just you add a few aging superstars, all of a sudden you're in the hunt. There's still work that needs to be done, so...
Yeah, exactly right. And then at some point in this rebuild, North are going to have to translate young, talented players into tangible statistical output. Again, you can tell this is yours because you love the stats.
This is mine, yeah.
They have a lot of chips invested in the midfield group, but have a lot of 18ths in their stats. Their defense is either older journeymen or raw youngsters, and their forward line is promising, but doesn't get nearly enough ball to showcase much of anything, which is exactly what the stats show.
Yeah.
And then... Yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say, as I said, it is a bit harsh, but, as I said, when you look at their list, as I said, it's just so many holes. And, as I said, in terms of people thinking like they're a next year team that they're going to see improvement, I just don't think it is. And we'll talk about it a bit when I talk about my predictions, but they're definitely still a 3-year team in my books.
Oh, well, probably at least a 3-year team to get out of the bottom 4. But they could be, some...
Well, I'm hoping they're pushing in the 8. They should at least be somewhat near that.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be like statistical dregs in 3 years, hopefully.
Hopefully. And then our last point is their 3 wins this year were against the Suns, the Eagles, and the Tigers with a combined margin of 26 points and didn't really have a notable amount of injury holding them back. This was a team in the dire straits, and if Richmond had metal kneecaps, they would have been wooden spooners for sure. Yeah, this is definitely your writing. And even had a worse percentage and same win record as last year, showing little or no growth, which is also true. But if you look at like stats specifically from last season, there is like very, very, very minor improvement, just not in the right areas.
Yeah, as I said, that's the more harsher look of it, but it's more just it is growth, but you are hoping for more.
Yeah.
In terms of from what was told last season.
The downside is that
Alistair Clarkson, all that sort of stuff, new mentality. Yeah. And it was just same old North.
It's just the downside is obvious that like Richmond fell all the way down, but like stats wise, they're still not too bad. But it's more like
some areas. Yeah.
But it's like there was something I was gonna like. North still had a chance for a big swing, like a big upswing in some areas, and it just didn't happen because all the other teams around them also got better.
Yeah, either that or even as I said, there wasn't enough to even separate them from West Coast. So.
Yeah. Right. Time for your prediction.
feel bad because I just felt like I've been crapping on them. But as I said, I do think North, if you look at a realistic view, you can see a lot of what they're doing. Like, I didn't really like what they were doing in the 2020s. Obviously, what they did after the Brad Scott era or in his last year was pretty awful in terms of setting up a team for the future.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of next year, I don't think there's much of a chance to improve. I think, again, a lot of veterans moving in the right direction with Parker and Kennedy. They needed players. Like, their list last year had no chance. And at least this list has some possible hope for consistency, supply, all that sort of thing. So even though, like, I've got a predicted range, 15th to 18th, bottom 4 lock, my gut feels 16th. I do actually see them edging closer. I've got a fairly solid hunch that the bottom 2 will be a lot worse than North. So I do feel there's improvement. I don't think it's enough to break out the bottom 4. There might be a team that's worse than them that they might sneak above, but yeah, honestly, 16th, put them below Essendon, and again, it's too much for 1 year to turn it around.
Yeah. And like I think everyone can kind of guess who you put 17th and 18th. Like I may as well say now it's got to be West Coast and Richmond. In what order, that remains to be seen. We'll see that next week.
Yeah.
But to round out your ladder currently, so first is Geelong, second is Brisbane, third is GWS. Again, you didn't actually fix it here, but fifth is Hawthorn, sixth is Fremantle, eighth is Collingwood, ninth is Carlton, 10th is Adelaide, 11th is Melbourne, 13th is Gold Coast, 15th is Essendon, and 16th is North Melbourne.
All right, it's fixed. I don't know what your problem was. you got one error corrected. I got one error corrected. We're
true.
even.
Very true. So that brings us to the end of week 3 of our preseason analysis breakdowns. Next week, we will be doing our teams in Port Adelaide and Richmond, as well as my second team in St Kilda. We will also likely touch on the Fremantle versus Indigenous All-Stars game, as majority of that information is now out to the public, and we should have time to go through it either at the start or at the end of next week's episode. So stay tuned for that.
I'm going to that game. Looking very forward to it.
Hell yeah. Otherwise, we will also use the episode after to touch on any other news that we might be missing to catch up on, whether it's major team injuries that we hadn't talked about prior, or like AFL specific stuff, like what stuff going on, maybe even with Tassie, because there's been a ton of news coming out of Tassie that we haven't really caught up on. So we might touch on that.
I was going to say the injuries have been kind to us. They're sort of following the episode because they're all happening to the lower alphabetically teams.
Yeah, we've actually
not a good year to be
pretty lucky with that, surprisingly.
Yeah, not a good team to be a W or an S team.
No, or even an R team at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, although all of the ACL boys, as they're now calling themselves, are currently in Samoa on an adventure, so they're having a bit of fun.
Nice.
But yes,
awesome.
that does bring us to the end of week 3 and episode 44 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast. I apologize that it's 3 hours long, but we had a lot to get through. We went pretty in depth, and I hope for the specifically the Hawthorn and North fans, I hope you appreciate my input, my better improved input. Now that we've had a couple of weeks of this to really solidify how we do notes and stuff. And I hope you're looking forward to us covering the last 6 teams in our breakdowns. If you're interested in checking out socials, please go check out our socials. I'm still very much active. I'm streaming 3-4 times a week on my Twitch channel at BlazeNinjaTTV. I'm fairly active on Instagram. I'm a little bit active on Twitter/X, but you know, we all know why that platform's gone down.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm kind of running out of things to say. I usually ramble at the end of this, but hopefully we will love you and leave you, and hopefully you will enjoy, and we will see you all next week for episode 45. So until then, take care.